Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Here is the state of play today. We are now paying tens of billions of pounds in order to leave the world's largest free trade area with our responsibilities met. This while surrendering all of our ability to define the rights and regulations under which the world's largest free trade area operates. We are doing this so that we can hopefully, but by no means yet definitely, start negotiating a new inferior arrangement with the world's largest free trade area in which we will no longer have any ability to frame or define its rights and regulations. And it's costing us at least £50 billion. And today, perhaps, for the first time since the Prime Minister issued that fatuous phrase, today we actually begin to get an idea of what Brexit actually means. And if you wonder at the kind of continuing confusion of people like me, it's to do with the cheerleaders. It's to do with the main proposers and promoters of this policy. Two weird things have happened. I always look at the beginning of a programme where we're going to talk a lot about Brexit for the things on which everyone can agree. It's a very vain and difficult task a lot of the time, but I suspect there's probably a weird degree of agreement today that we shouldn't be paying £50 billion. People who understand the issues will be arguing that we shouldn't be paying £50 billion because leaving is clearly an act of supreme idiocy, and people who don't understand the issues will be arguing that we shouldn't be paying £50 billion. We should just tell them to go swivel and, sovereignty and what have you. But I suspect that the notion that this bill must be paid sticks in almost everybody's craw. Oddly, it will fall to Remainers, who believe that the act of leaving is ridiculous, to explain to Leavers why we have to do it. So oddly, people who want to stay in the European Union will, in a sort of absence of proper objective analysis and fact-based journalism, will have to explain to people still labouring under the illusion that they need us more than we need them, why even this is preferable to no deal, even a £50 billion bill. And when I speak about confusion, this is the bit where I lose my ability to properly analyse. I'm just going to play you a little clip from March, I think, of this year. This is the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, David Davis.
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them. And Prime Minister said we are at the end, coming to the end of the time when we're paying enormous sums to the European Union. We'll, of course, meet our international obligations, but we expect also our rights to be respected too. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that sort of money change hands.
Not that sort of money, but some sort of money.
Well, look, we have said before that we will meet our international obligations, or whatever that turns out to be. But that is nothing like we're talking about here. Indeed, the House of Lords committee on this subject reckoned that was zero only a few weeks ago.
Oh, so you're thinking you might pay zero?
Well,
no.
wait and see.
So, seriously, let's not start shouting at each other yet. Let's focus on that. That man, David Davis, the Secretary of State for departing the European Union, in March of this year, displaying an absolute ignorance of what many people had already described as inevitable. And he is in charge of negotiating our deal, so to speak, whatever happens next. In March of this year, he described what is now happening as somehow being impossible, or at least beyond his belief to be charitable, his comprehension to be uncharitable. And that explains why we've seen this absolutely bonkers shift from the possibility of a wise, or at least a moderate, Brexit to this chomping extremity of the movement that is, or has been, demanding that we walk away without anything, without meeting any of our responsibilities or having anything in place. So we now today learn that we're going to spend £50 billion making ourselves less able to trade freely with the world's largest single market. And I don't know, I know we've joked a lot about fish and passports, but I still don't know what it is people think they're getting in return, what it is that people think makes it worthwhile. I'm going to repeat this again and again and again today, because as far as I can tell, it is an absolute and complete distillation of precisely where we are. We are paying tens of billions of pounds to leave the world's largest free trade area while surrendering all of our ability to define its rights and regulations. Rights and regulations which we will have to obey and abide by if we want to do a trade deal with that free trade area. And we're doing it so that we can hopefully start negotiating an inferior agreement with the same largest free trade area. It will be slightly smaller because we won't be in it anymore, but it will still be the biggest in the world. So I kind of have these moments where I think, I'm not going to lie to you, I think, oh mate, wind your neck in. You can't be, you must be getting it wrong. There's no way that a significant swathe of the population is seeing a naked emperor and insisting that he's got his clothes on. But when I play you that David Davis clip, I kind of today, I don't want a shouting match or a slanging match, but I do hope some of the people who perhaps have been embarrassed to ring in because the scrutiny to which I expose their arguments it kind of undermines them or renders them ridiculous. And it's not a pleasant experience for anybody, really. But when you hear the actual Secretary of State describing as close to impossible what has actually happened, I can, I suppose, just about get my head around how you might still have faith in the idea of paying tens of billions of pounds to leave the world's largest free trade area while surrendering all of your ability to define its rights and regulations. I can just about get my head around how you might still have faith in that idea. But how can you have faith in the man in charge of doing it? This is a man who shortly after assuming the job, took to Twitter to describe how, first of all, he'd do a deal with Germany, and then with France, and then with lots of other companies. A succession, a hat-trick, a trio of tweets that displayed such abject ignorance of how the European Union works, that if he was working as a bus conductor, he'd have been fired. If he displayed such abject ignorance of how buses work, he would never have been allowed back on a bus again. But he remained Secretary of State. And you fast forward 18 months, or fast forward just under a year to that Question Time appearance, where he says, no. And today, it's there, it's clear, it's in black and white, it's happening, we're paying it. Do you know why we're paying it? Because it was never particularly complicated. We're paying it because we are signatories to a succession of agreements and treaties and spending pledges, which we will, with honour, have to keep. And the prospect of starting work on whatever inferior arrangement replaces our single market membership cannot even begin until we've demonstrated our good faith in the context of treaties and pledges already made and already signed. It's moved beyond surreal now, because this is real money. It's not on the side of a bus, I grant you, but it's real money, and it's somewhere in the region of £50 billion. Now, the response will be from the quislings and apologists for this ludicrous course of action. The response will be, well, we currently pay £8 billion to the European Union every year, so we'll have covered this figure relatively quickly. But you have to understand that the reason why we pay a lot of money into the European Union is because we make a lot of money from being members of the European Union. It's fairly straightforward. It's the reason why Germany pay more than we do is because they make even more. We've got, or we had before France overtook us last week, the second biggest economy in that free market. So it's inevitable that we will be the second biggest donors to it because we take the most out of it. That's almost too simplistic for my 9-year-old's maths homework. And yet, apparently, huge swathes of the nation still can't see it. It always had to be like this. There was no other way. And yet, when David Davis says there was, I return to this notion that if he was in any other line of work, he wouldn't just have been fired. He'd probably be sued for compensation by his former employers. It's as if, do you know who David Davis is? David Davis is a football manager. who has never really managed a football team before. But the chairman, in his wisdom, has decided to bring him in to run the team. And at his first press conference, David Davis announces that his master plan is to play 5 at the back, 5 in the middle, 5 up front with 3 goalkeepers. And everybody at the press conference, actually that's not true, 48% of people at the press conference are sitting there going, how can he play 5 at the back, 5 in the middle, 5 up front and 3 goalkeepers? He doesn't seem to understand the most basic rules of football. And 52% of people in the press conference are arguing that it's everybody else who's ever played football who doesn't understand the rules of football, and David Davis is the only one who actually grasps how to get things done. Then he appears on the television and says there is no earthly way we're ever going to pay £50 billion for that centre forward. And 6 months later, it's announced by the chairman that we're paying £50 billion for that centre forward, and he's still got the job. And he's still telling the fans that when the new season starts, we'll have 5 at the back, 5 in the middle, 5 up front, and 3 goalkeepers. So then you get the arguments about democracy and sovereignty, which almost all uniformly display a complete ignorance of how well, we don't elect the European Commission. You don't elect the cabinet, pal. It's appointed by people that you do elect. You don't elect the civil service. And the notion that because they're foreign, they must somehow be, by definition, inferior to British politicians. And yet the same people yesterday are running around screaming blue murder about the fact that some top banker has said Jeremy Corbyn would be even worse than Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn's British. I thought that if he was British, he was bound to be better than Juncker or Merkel or whoever it is you're picking on today. Until you point out that the same people who've encouraged us to be suspicious of all foreign politicians are the same people that encourage us to malign the memory of a Labour leader's dead father. It's absolutely incomprehensible now. And truly incomprehensible. We've said a few times that Brexit stopped being political a while ago and became psychological. It's become religious now, hasn't it? It's cognitive dissonance. I suffer from cognitive dissonance in the context of religion. I go to church. I believe in God, and yet my intellect laughs at my heart. My head laughs at my heart for believing in God. Certainly for following the teachings of Jesus or trying to. My head laughs at my heart for that. That's cognitive dissonance, isn't it? And that's where we are now. How can anybody be listening to the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, describing the prospect of a £50 billion bill as pie in the sky, and then today, when we discover that we're paying precisely that sum, still have faith in his ability to deliver something positive? And remember, every time a company announces that it's creating a few new jobs or opening a factory, that doesn't prove that Brexit is a good idea, unless you can demonstrate that they wouldn't have done it in a pre-Brexit Britain. It's just reached a point now where one wonders what the point is of even talking about it anymore. Here's the Secretary of State saying that something will never happen. Okay? It's happened. But we still believe in him. So phone line's open on this. I haven't actually asked a question yet, but I would love to know. Actually, let's just do it straight, okay? React to this. What is your gut when you found out that we're paying £50 billion? If your reaction was mine, which is, yeah, of course we are, but this is really going to cause trouble for the furiously hard of thinking. And if you're a member of the furiously hard of thinking and you're really furious about this, just give me a call. Tell me why. Is this the first time everyone's going to agree that for completely different reasons nobody thinks we should pay this bill? People who understand the issues think we shouldn't pay it because leaving is daft. People who still don't understand the issues still have faith in a man who's displayed his abject ignorance of the most simple undertakings of European Union membership. Hey, David Davis. People who don't understand the issues still have faith in a man like that. They don't think we should pay it because they don't understand why we have to if we continue down this path of insanity. 17 minutes after 10. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Try and keep it friendly today, although obviously I reserve the right to lose my rag completely. Tens of billions of pounds to leave the world's largest free trade area, in which we currently have a lot of influence over its rights and regulations. Tens of billions of pounds to leave it and lose all of that influence. Why? So that we can start from scratch. The 56 trade agreements that the European Union has with other countries, and of course the new one that we will need ourselves, which will by definition be inferior to the one that we currently have, and for which we pay £50 billion in order to meet our responsibilities and obligations from the past before we can even think about moving forward. And I've played you evidence of the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union having no grasp whatsoever of this being an inevitability. But still people cheer. Why? What are you cheering now? 0345 6060973. Steve's in Sheffield. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You all right?
I'm all good, mate.
Hi,
Well, you say, if that's a genuine question, I feel a bit like Charlton Heston at the end of Planet of the Apes, but I think you were just making small talk, weren't you?
Just as a general, fair enough. No, I mean, I live in a predominantly Leave area. I voted Remain.
Yes.
Unbelievable. I mean, I was a teacher for years, and a lot of, educated teachers wanted to vote Leave, and the main reason that I got from them was a non-elected EU. Well, the House of Lords is non-elected. As you just said before, a lot of the House of Commons, the Cabinet picks itself. And it's just some of the arguments still. I mean, I was in Costa Coffee in an area outskirts in Rotherham, which is called like Manvers, which is basically a big area that's been regenerated, lots of housing.
Yes. And
there was literally a guy that said, and I had to laugh out loud, what have the Europeans ever done for us? I was like, it's like Monty Python. The European money actually built the area that he was standing on.
Now, at this point, I would argue that, well, we give money to the European Union, they then spend that money on us. We can stop giving them the money and spend the money directly. But it misses the fundamental point of a single market, which is that
single market and the biggest single market going. It's still, but people genuinely still believe that we're going to be miles better out of it, and even no deal. And it's just going to be an absolute nightmare. It's going to be a decade of just carnage. And you still can't see. And the logical argument. I mean, when I go onto Facebook and I go onto LBC and look at the comments from your little clips, and some of the rants that you get is hilarious.
I don't let myself do that anymore. It's because it's like going down a rabbit hole. I know it is, but you see, you're being sneering and condescending now, according to their tiny little minds.
I'm sorry, but you've got to talk facts and logic, and they just no. They just go, this vile man on the radio.
I think they call me Angem O'Brien last time I checked, which is
it's hilarious.
I know.
What are you talking
but mate,
about?
do you want to know something that's going to ruin your whole day?
Go on.
Their vote counts the same as yours does.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I know. The one thing, I've said to my dad was a big Remain voter.
Right.
And I said, in all fairness, Dad, when your generation go, it'll be a lot better. I won't be funny. But actually, a lot of the younger people wanted to vote Remain.
I don't like that school of thought, and there's plenty of older people who, like your dad, recognise the basic realities of common sense.
The percentage of that age group, 60 plus, who actually voted Leave, it's a lot more than ones who voted Remain.
Yes, and the generational conflict is probably going to be the defining, or hopefully not conflict, but imbalances will be the defining political movement of the next couple of decades. Presumably, we're going to hear from people talking in slightly vague terms about independence and democracy. Is there no circumstances in which you could imagine that keeping you warm at night when you can't afford to turn the heating on?
It's just a democracy. I know we can't say it, obviously, because, Mr Blair is the worst thing since sliced bread, even though the country was in a lot better state with education and NHS when Labour in government then, when he was the Prime Minister. But even he said, and obviously massive Remain, obviously, because he's the one that wanted it all, wants us in. But what actually do the big, they make a massive issue to our laws and they tell us what to do. Actually, really? Have they actually ever changed a real main law that's made a difference?
No, I think at this point it's customary to conflate the European Court of Human Rights with the European Court of Justice, but let's not second-guess anybody. Steve, stay sane if you can. If you can't, stay safe. Peter is in St Albans. Peter, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello, good morning.
Hello, Peter.
Yes, I'm in St Albans, a town which voted predominantly to Remain, but I'm a very, very strong Leaver. And yes, I do believe very much that we should live in a free, independent country. And for me, the issues of democracy transcend just about anything else. I mean, if you believe in democracy and the rule of governance through democratic means, I don't think you can believe in the European Union.
Why not?
And I believe, because it believes in the rule of governance through bureaucratic means. It's inherently undemocratic.
What's the civil service if it's not a bureaucracy?
Yes, okay, but what's the European Commission and Jean-Claude Juncker?
European Commission is like a sort of turbocharged civil service that is
absolutely,
that can be voted out, can't it, by MEPs?
Yeah, but at least the civil.
What was that word I just used? The one that began with V.
At least the civil servants in our country are civil servants. They represent our government. And the other point I want to make...
But the civil servants in the European Union are our civil servants as well. They represent our union.
they represent the views of 27 countries.
Yes, with single market views, the union, the unified views, and some of them are British.
The other point I
Well,
wanted
no, let's go through the points one by one. Okay, let's not scrutinise your reasons for saying what you say. Let's just let you say it.
The point I wanted to make, because obviously I'm time limited.
Oh, are you?
If you believe in the sovereignty of nation states, again, you can't believe in the European Union.
So the white paper, the first white paper published after the vote, which said British Parliament has always been sovereign, but that was false, was it?
The British Parliament is certainly more sovereign than the European Parliament or the way the European Union works. The European Union's raison d'etre, right from the start, when it was conceived in the late 1980s, was to create closer integration within the European Union. That's what it exists for.
Well, that was in the treaty in 1975. That was in the very first one we signed, closer political union.
We joined the European Economic Community, which was essentially a trade agreement.
No, it wasn't. Ted Heath wrote a very long and detailed letter about why it was much more than that. It was a kind of embodiment of what Winston Churchill described as the United States of Europe.
The majority of the British people thought we were voting for a trade agreement. Yes, I know there was a coded message behind the scenes.
But there was no coded message, Peter. There was a categorical statement in both the treaty and the information provided to the British people by their own Prime Minister, Ted Heath, that it was an exercise in closer political union in the hope of not only fomenting and fostering greater trade, but also creating what Winston Churchill described as the finest bulwark against the prospect of another European war, which would be the United States of Europe. But I mean, I appreciate you don't. I appreciate you're short of time and you don't want your position to be properly scrutinised. Did you know we were going to pay £50 billion?
I would have been happy to pay £50 billion. I didn't know we were going to pay it.
So how much faith do you have? How much faith do you have in this man today?
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that sort of money change hands.
So he is in charge, literally, of providing what you describe, although you don't want to answer questions about what you mean when you use these words, you describe as freedom and independence. He's in charge, right? How much faith do you have in him?
Who is that man, anyway?
Yeah, he's the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union. But, you know, what would he know, eh?
Well, he's been hapless. He's effectively had the runaround by Barnier.
Oh, okay,
I mean,
right.
The point is.
You mean, but when you say runaround, you mean by sticking to the position that you laid out at the very beginning and haven't actually diverged from?
The point is, though, just to get to my original point, that millions of people did vote to leave the European Union.
Well, we can agree on that.
Not out of immigration, which has been mentioned so many times, because
only by you today
in a free, independent country.
Yes, but you wouldn't let me ask you what you meant by freedom and independence. Do you remember? Because you wanted to move on to your next point, and you were short of time. And now so am I. It's 10:30. Simon Conway has the headlines.
The Transport Secretary has told LBC the UK will meet its obligations to the EU following reports a divorce bill has been agreed. The amount is said to be around £50 billion, more than double what Theresa May initially offered.
Who on earth is that man? I suppose that's one response to the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union, not knowing that the bill that we've agreed to pay was somehow inevitable, and that's really where I struggle. You can sort of talk about freedom and democracy if you want until you're blue in the face, but you really need to understand what you mean by those words. Otherwise, they're just sort of letters arranged in a pretty order. Democracy in the context of European Union membership is probably the biggest red herring of all. One member of the European Commission per member state, bound by their oath of office to represent the general interest of the EU as a whole rather than their home state. It's kind of the definition of a union or a political union. And then when people say that they didn't know it was going to be a political union, you refer them to Ted Heath in 1972, sorry, not 1975. The community which we are joining is far more than a common market. It is a community in the true sense of that term. It is concerned not only with the establishment of free trade, economic and monetary union and other major economic issues, important though they are, but also as the Paris Summit meeting has demonstrated, with social issues which affect us all: environmental questions, working conditions in industry, consumer protection, aid to development areas, vocational training. It is, in brief, concerned with improving the quality of life of the peoples of Western Europe. And we're paying £50 billion to leave it. Why? 0345 6060 973. Jonty is in St John's Wood. Jonty, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, I voted Remain, but I get increasingly frustrated by the public discourse because
Yes.
not only do people not drill down into the 50 billion, but it's actually really hard to find out the line-by-line information about what this 50 billion is made up of. So I found a 58-page independent academic report and actually read it to try and understand the thing. And we're not actually paying 50... The whole thing, the narrative is incorrect. We're not paying 50 billion to leave. We're actually paying 50 billion to stay. And the reason why I say that is that most of the 50 billion that is being earmarked for us to pay is payments that would have to be made up until the end of March 2019 in any case.
So this is for our transition period, effectively?
No, it's not a transition period. A transition period, if there is one, because that hasn't been decided yet, will be post-March 2019.
Yes.
We are still in the club. We are still getting all the benefits, as you said, like the Germans are, up until the end of March 2019. Most of that 50 billion is for up to that point. So the number we should be talking about is what liabilities are we paying for after we leave the club. That is the bill for leaving. Most of the bill we're talking about is the bill for remaining.
I don't know that we're splitting hairs or not, but I agree with your dissatisfaction with the discourse. The bill, as it is for things we've already agreed to, effectively, and some of them will persist long after we leave the European Union. So I don't know, unless I'm misunderstanding you, I don't know how excited I am by the distinction that you're trying to draw.
But you would get excited. I know you're a deep thinker and you're an analytical thinker. Have you studied accounting?
No, I haven't. Life's too short.
All right. It's the difference between accrual and cash. It's somewhat the difference between accrual and cash accounting. We need to understand what we would have to have paid anyhow had we remained in by March 2019. A lot of those liabilities are all...
I understand you, yes. But this is where the relevance of market membership kicks in, isn't it? Because any payment that we make to the European Union is seen as a kind of payment in return for membership access and the kind of trade that's allowed us to grow our economy. And that's we now pay to cease to be that.
No, but which we are benefiting from every day up until the end of March 2019.
Yes.
The correct discussion to be having as an analytical journalist looking for the truth is what is the amount that we're paying for which we are not getting benefit of the return. What is that number?
I will bow to you on matters of accountancy, but I'm afraid I will not bow to you on deciding what makes for the most interesting and informative conversations. That is my area of expertise. And if we're talking about knowledge, I think the largest element of the payment is for future pensions, isn't it? Or certainly one of the largest areas.
No. Out of 724 billion of liabilities, the pension element is about 62. So you're quite misinformed.
No. In terms of what we're now paying, our £50 billion bill. There's not £724 billion worth of liabilities.
No. Our proportion is between 12 and 15% of the gross amount. The gross amount is 724.
Well, that's huge then.
Well, only 62 is pension. So what I'm saying is you're misinformed.
I don't think I am. I think you've just... Again, as I said, I don't want to split hairs or get pedantic. What do you think we are getting, as it were, that is going to be better than what we had before when we've left? I mean, you may not, of course. You've said that you voted in the other direction, but you can speculate about what other people think. We're paying all of this money. We will, you're right, spend some time in the coming weeks breaking down precisely what we're paying for and what is future, as it were, and what is past and what is present. But what's the trade-off? What is the...
Okay, so
go on.
The trade-off for me, I don't know. There are a lot of unknowns here, right?
Yes.
I'm a Remainer, so I'm not going to argue the Leaver position. Okay.
Well, you could describe it. You don't have to argue it. I can't even describe it anymore.
Let me answer you the question.
Of course.
This is a great country. This is a country
Absolutely.
of innovation, and this is a country of resilience, and this is a country of hope, and it's a country of liberty. And I believe that even though we have now dealt ourselves, as you say, a punch in our own face, even though we've dealt ourselves a hand that I would not have chosen, I believe in the resilience and the tenacity of this country to forge a better future, nevertheless, in face of this adversity. I believe we can do it.
How?
If you look back in history, if you were a journalist around the time of Henry VIII's separation from Rome, you wouldn't have thought that was a good idea either.
I'd have been burnt at the stake, actually, but let's have that conversation on a different day. How? Because I've just heard an article of faith. I've suggested that things have gone a little bit religious. They moved from political to psychological, and now they've gone religious. You just made an article of faith. I believe that children are the future. Treat them well and let them show the way.
You can't tell a Remainer that he's faithful in leaving. I'm just saying we've dealt the cards we have. You're the one who...
No, you said it will be better.
No, but you shifted the conversation.
I didn't mean to. I just want to know how it's going to be better. I want more than I believe. I want... Well, look, here you go. This will happen.
Well, we're not going to change it, so we might as well do the best with what we have.
And what is that?
It's not a disaster, but I've done the economic calculations. It's not a disaster. I'm much more worried about our housing crisis than I am about leaving the EU.
You can't separate the two, I don't think. If leaving the EU is going to impact upon our economy in the way that, everybody pretty much contends that it will, except people like David Davis, who frankly doesn't appear to know what day it is, then things like investment in infrastructure and housing is going to be affected. 10:43 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. I play this again because you do realise this is where I'm falling out of love with the BBC at the moment, is that they don't go in hard when something is demonstrably true. They're obsessed with this notion of impartiality. So you end up with... Owen Paterson is probably the best example of a politician who now says the polar opposite publicly of what he said during the referendum campaign. Oh, and also I found a wonderful piece written by Daniel Hannan and other self-styled clever clogs of the Brexit movement describing what the country is going to be like in 2025. It's now been deleted from all internet archives and caches, but J.K. Rowling, of all people, dug it out on Twitter last night. And I'll tell you what, when she is praising somebody else for their powers of writing fantasy fiction, you know that they must be pretty bloody good at it. And Hannan, I think, possibly gives Rowling herself a run for her money when it comes to the levels of fantastic invention he employs in that article. 10:44 is the time. Ian's in the Isle of Wight. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, good morning. I'd like to say, first of all, I'm having a great day. I've been in hospital for 19 days. I've had 2 bouts of bowel surgery, and they told me I can go home today. That's number one.
I'm very pleased to hear it, mate, and I hope your recovery is long and complete.
Thank you. I'm feeling great. And before we move on, there are some wonderful people work here, and we don't. I own a company, James. I'm a director of an industrial maintenance company, and I pay people more money to fix machines than the NHS pays people to fix people. So we'll
some
leave
food for thought there. We are going to run out of time, unfortunately, and delighted though I am at your good news. What did you ring in to tell us?
Okay. If you're telling me we're paying £55 billion to leave the EU, that's 5 years membership fee. The net amount it costs us to be in the EU is $10 billion a year.
It's 8, but of course that's money that we pay because of the access, because of the prosperity that membership of the single market brings. So you can't really compare the two sums to each other.
No, I can, James. Because
you can. Of course you can, but not logically.
James, for £55 billion, my friend, if we get a free trade deal with the EU...
We can't.
We can. Why are we giving them £55 billion then?
Because of all the obligations and responsibilities that we already have, both to meet treaties and spending plans that we've already agreed to, and to meet things like the pension provision of MEPs and employees moving forward. That's why. This has nothing to do with the trade deal. Nothing
James,
at all.
How much of a dent in £55 billion is EU pension provisions going to make? I mean, come on. So if £55 billion...
It's about 16%, according to Jonty, who did sound like he'd done his sums.
Listen, James...
I am, mate.
David Cameron told us we had a vote, and if it was 50.1%, either way, that was the result. We live in a democracy. Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, they want a federal Europe. They want fiscal, economic, political union. This is not right. We don't want this. We voted against it, James.
They don't want economic union. I mean, you can't keep saying these words that don't mean what you think they mean, mate.
What do you mean? Don't think what I think they mean, James?
I mean, you keep using words and they don't mean what you think they mean. What does economic union mean?
No, this is what Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker say.
No, they don't. What do you think economic union means?
James. James,
Ian.
if you read the 5 presidents' report...
No, I want you to tell me what you think economic union means, that's all.
I don't know what economic union means.
But you're absolutely certain that they want it and that it's awful.
They've written it down, James.
But you don't know what it means. How can you not like something if you don't know what it means?
James, I want...
Ian.
To be in this country. I do not want to be part of a federal Europe, James.
What does that mean, Ian? What does federal Europe mean?
A federal Europe means fiscal, economic, political union.
But we've just established that you don't know what those words mean. So what does federal Europe mean?
Does Jean-Claude Juncker know what those words mean?
I'll ask him when I meet him, but he's not here telling me that it's a bad thing or a good thing. You are. So what does federal Europe mean, Ian?
Oh, James, please. We've had a democratic vote. You're trying to make me sound like I'm uneducated.
I'm not. I'm asking you. I'm trying to make you sound like you know what the words you're using mean, which is why I'm asking you what those words mean. I'm not sure myself, mate. If you're worried that I'm being patronising, what does federal Europe mean?
Federal Europe means that we would have fiscal, economic, political union.
All right. I don't want to curtail your recovery. So I've asked you what economic union means, and you said I don't know. And then I asked you what federal Europe means, and you said it means economic union.
No, I didn't say that, James.
You did, Ian.
I'm telling you what's in the 5 presidents.
And I'm asking what's in your brain. I'm asking what's in your brain. What does federal Europe mean?
What do you mean the federal Europe that Jean-Claude Juncker talks about? It means federal Europe means we all pay the same tax rate. It means that all our laws are the same.
Right. Well, then we move from the realms of not really understanding something to talking utter hogwash, Ian.
But no, you've lost me there.
I think that happened hours ago, possibly years. It's 10:48. Can you think of another line of work in which you could display such rank incompetence and keep your job, other than politics, current politics? We've got a foreign secretary who is actively imperiling British citizens in foreign jails, or a British citizen in a foreign jail, and we have a Secretary of State for departing the European Union who doesn't know what day it is. It doesn't have the most fundamental understanding of the issues he's charged with negotiating. You think I'm exaggerating? It's reported today. The Telegraph and the Financial Times had this scoop, although, of course, the newspapers that cheerlead for the European Union have not put it on their front pages. You think I exaggerate? Daily Express has got a story about diabetes on the front page, and a little sidebar saying, May still playing hardball over EU divorce bill demand. That's just not true. It doesn't matter. We're down the rabbit hole now. I don't think the Daily Star counts as a proper newspaper. The Sun goes for Here Comes the Brit, more Meghan Markle, because 277 pages of it yesterday wasn't enough. Telegraph, because they got the scoop, have gone with it. Telegraph's a little bit split personality at the moment, in that most of the news journalists and an increasing number of the comment writers seem to be clear that it's an almighty disaster. But the owners, of course, who also own the Ritz Hotel, those doughty anti-elitists, remain persuaded that it's a brilliant idea. A decision that I'm sure has absolutely nothing to do with looming EU legislation regarding offshore fortunes and tax arrangements. They came out for it. The Mirror, there you go, the Mirror sort of, that has got it on the front page, £49 billion. And I think the Mail, presumably they've got Meghan Markle on the front page again as well, have they? Because it's not a big deal, is it? It's not a big deal that in March the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union said this.
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them.
And today we learned that it is 50 billion. I don't know about it. He said, crikey. It's like you take your car into the garage, you lift up the bonnet, and the mechanic goes, well, I don't know about any of this. What's that then? What's that? Carburettor? A big end? What is it, eh? You go, ooh, flipping out. I don't know about that. I don't think there's going to be anything like this. And then someone else comes along and goes, yeah, that and that all needs fixing. It's going to cost 50 billion quid. Oh, what's your job again? Oh, I'm in charge of the negotiations. What? You're in charge of the negotiations? And the thing you said would never happen has just happened, and you're still in charge of the negotiations. Aren't you the bloke who said that we'd do a deal with Germany as soon as the vote had come in, and then after that we'd do one with France, which is in direct contravention of the most fundamental Europe? Yeah, that's me, same David Davis, woohoo! And the bloke who had those hilarious T-shirts when I was running for Conservative leaders saying double D on them, with some women with sort of quite big breasts. Yeah, that's me. I'm that guy. I'm in charge of this. What are we getting again? Sovereignty. We've already got it. Democracy. No, I kind of already got it. In fact, you could argue that... Terry's in Scunthorpe. Terry, help me out.
Hi there. Yeah, I was slightly nervous, but then I realised I was probably in the same team as you, which is Team Sane.
How can it even be a team? How can it even be a Team Sane? I mean, you just heard David Davis holding up a great big banner saying, I understand nothing and I'm in charge, and people are still cool with that.
Well, I'll make one point and then I'll follow up with how I kind of relate it to this situation. I think the determination to follow through with Brexit and anything regarding no deal or bad deal is... I read a report recently that kind of correlated, I don't know if this creates causation, that Labour Leave votes was correlated with Labour to Conservative swing in constituencies.
Yes.
So I firmly believe that the government, currently as it is, will follow and be determined on this path by any means necessary, whether that's conscious, whether that's just... and the way I relate it to the latest scenario is, let's be brutally honest, a lot of other MPs and state people, they've done lots of misdemeanours, probably worse than this one, and she's not, and Theresa May's not cracked down on that. So I think that moving forward, it's quite indicting, really, and I'm quite worried about the future. I've got kids, and
do you not find any comfort in notions of freedom and democracy and resisting the ambition of a federal... The army's a big one. Apparently we're supposed to be frightened of armies that we're in. I'm no historian, but I think most problems are caused for countries by armies that they're not in, but we're supposed to be terrified of the prospect of a European Union military cooperation in the future, which currently 19 out of 27 countries are opposed to, but which is bound to happen anyway because, fish.
Yeah, well, to be fair, reading reports have been, I don't know, kind of open to all debates, kind of on the left and right, and seen things over the years that, to be fair, a lot of people wanting to leave the European Union and a lot of the facts around it, they didn't listen to the facts, it was just on emotion, and they got swayed by numerous kind of political proponents in the sector, without realising actually it was kind of written as a sovereign state that kind of created it and burgeoned it on through the years.
And the role we played in a lot of the things that have become problematical was immense. And you could make a very strong case for arguing that the single market was Margaret Thatcher's invention, and yet all of these people with their sort of little Margaret Thatcher toothpaste mugs are convinced that she'd be massively opposed to it. But what I struggle with, and I will continue to struggle with, I think, is what stops pennies from dropping. So for me, I think in a logical universe, that David Davis clip from March, when held up against what's happened today, that would be oh my God, well hang on, he's one of the people I trusted, how can I still trust him? Jacob Rees-Mogg, quite rightly furious about the fiasco regarding the impact assessments. David Davis essentially you've got politicians on the record claiming that they'd read them when the Secretary of State subsequently reveals that they hadn't actually been written at that point, and then suddenly a month later they have. But it's like this astonishing cornucopia of chaos, and yet what keeps people convinced that it's a good thing, Terry?
I don't know. Personal bias, I think.
We can all do personal bias, but I'm never going to stand on sort of sail around the world or go to space and look at the Earth from space and insist that it's still flat. Why are they still saying it's flat?
Deep-rooted beliefs. I think we should get to the... I'm going to use briefly a political proponent.
I don't think you are. We're going to run out of time. So we'll have to leave that one hanging, build up a bit of suspense. I'd like to talk about this until the cows come home, but I can only do that if you want to. And I suspect if you're still pro-leave, you don't want to talk about it. I don't know which bit to focus on now. I don't have any appetite to talk about anything else. If I'd told you to vote to leave the European Union, I'd be moving heaven and earth not to talk about it now. Absolutely. Don't talk about it anymore. Put the royal wedding on the front page. Put diabetes on the front page. Don't put anything on the front page that will prove to our readers we've sold them the mother of all pups. But I have the national interest in the forefront of my mind, and I do not understand why so many people remain committed to damaging and harming it. So I'm interested in the David Davis angle, but I don't know if that one floats as much as I think it should. I guess the notion of denial is uniquely tied up in David Davis's job because he was a fairly prominent leaver, although by no means one of the characters that pulled him over the line. That accolade lies firmly with Johnson and Gove, I think, and people like Daniel Hannan, the kind of self-styled clever ones. The nativist, the xenophobic vote was signed, sealed and delivered from the start. Paul Dacre played a big part in building up the size of that vote, of course, by exaggerating and embellishing, or in the words of Wikipedia, when they decided to remove it from a list of trusted news sources, flat out fabrications. So but that vote was always nailed on for Brexit. It was the more apparently educated, immigrant bashing positions that seemed intriguing to me. So that's why responsibility lies with the Johnsons and the Goves. But when you learn just how rubbish David Davis is at his job, how you could still have faith in the process but not the personnel, I guess. So I mean, who has faith in him when we know? We've proved this morning, just by the most cursory of glances into the rearview mirror, we've proved that he didn't have the understanding, the wit or the knowledge to see this £50 billion bill on the horizon. In fact, he saw the precise... I'm going to do it again, because this is where, I don't know, I kind of the curious state of British journalism comes into play. Other countries look at us now and go, what? And you say, well, what you have to understand is that we've been spent 30 years being spoon-fed lies by journalists about the European Union. Some of it mischievous and funny, like bananas. Some of it really, really dangerous. Poor old Ian on the Isle of Wight, just out of hospital and trying out all his great lines that he's rehearsed before about federal Europe and fiscal union and political union. And the poor sod can't explain what a single one of those phrases means. And then he goes on about democracy, when the most fundamental requirement of a functioning democracy is an informed electorate. Demos and kratos, power of the people. They have to be informed. Knowledge is the ultimate power. Why did you vote that way? X, Y, and Z. What does X, Y, and Z mean? I have no idea. You're trying to make me sound uneducated. I'm not. I'm trying to make you see the light. And I don't understand why so many people still refuse to. What we can do with that knowledge, I don't know. But you can't stop. There's 100 people on a plane, right? 52 of them vote to replace the pilot with a chimpanzee. Do you really think the other 48% are going to sit there and go, well, I think we should all make the best of this? You know, maybe chimpanzees will turn out to be really good at flying planes. No, of course they're not. David Davis turns up for his first job as a football manager. We're going to play 5 at the front, 5 in the middle, 5 at the back, 3 in goal. And 52% of the club's fans think that he's a genius who understands football better than all the other people do. They've got it coming. Mr. Juncker, with your football team, playing just 11 players. Wait till David Davis turns up with 18, because he understands this stuff and you don't. He understands nothing.
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that sort of money change hands.
That's the Secretary of State, my friends. That's not some bloviating idiot with a newspaper column. That's not some mischief-making, attention-seeking politician with a kind of psychodrama and an ego trip unfolding. That is the actual Secretary of State for doing this, describing his view of the likelihood of something that happened last night ever happening. So, yeah, call me about this. I mean, this is not Brexit. This is personnel, not policy. This man is still in charge.
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that sort of money change hands.
He is still in charge of the negotiating process, and his understanding of it was such that he didn't think we'd be seeing any such sums as the one we're now looking at. So, look, I'll take all the ad hominem abuse that you've got. Keep it coming, seriously. Keeps us chuckling when we come off air. I'll tell you what, if anyone ever finds out I've got a bonus link to social media interactions, there are going to be a lot of heads exploding all over the internet on there. But keep that coming. Keep it coming. That's all good. The question is this. Not how do you still have faith in the policy, because that's religious. I don't get it, okay? I believe fiscal union is bad. What does it mean? No idea. I believe they want a federal Europe. What does it mean? No idea. I believe democracy and freedom. What can't we do now? Well, I don't really know. Just him. Let's just talk about him. How can he be in charge? 03456060973. Or if, like me, you just have a need to vent your spleen because it would appear that in almost every other corner of the British media they're still convinced that the Emperor's got clothes on, then come here and describe his shiny buttocks to your heart's content. Hassan's in Canary Wharf. Hassan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Just wanted to go over a little bit. I mean, I've got a background in management consultancy, and when the thing is, when your first day in the job, almost, you're taught how to attack your own ideas, because once you put a presentation together internally, you debate whether or not it's good enough to go before a client, and it doesn't come naturally. So you're there, you've got your ideas on the screen in front of you, and people are attacking them, and it's a process, and it takes weeks, it takes months even, for you to get your head around, well, I've just got my idea up, and it seemed great to me when I put it up on the screen.
I am slightly losing the will to live, Hassan. I don't want to sound rude, but my emotions are running high this morning, and you're sounding a little bit dull.
So my issue is when someone like David Davis puts an idea on, maybe he believed it at the time. And
what idea? What did he believe? That we wouldn't have to pay a bill? And he's in charge of the negotiations.
Yeah, maybe he did. But my issue isn't the fact that he was stupid enough to put that forward. My issue is that at this time, when he's convinced now that, well, I absolutely had it wrong, he's not man enough to stand up and say, well, I was wrong, and this is.
Do you think he's in denial, or do you think he still thinks he's right? And actually, that's the same thing, isn't it?
I think he is in denial, and I think he's basically now searching for other reasons to convince himself that he was right at the beginning. This is what in consulting terms is called pride of ownership. You've had an idea, you think it's great, everyone's convinced it's an awful idea, it's absolutely stupid. Evidence has come forward to suggest yes, you were wrong. But you've got so much pride in your idea that you're just like, well, no, there must be other reasons why I was right. And you actually have to learn that skill. And at 20, in your early 20s as a consultant, you learn it. But what's shocking is the person that's running the process hasn't got this skill. So when someone like...
I tell you what, I can tell you're a management consultant because you just used about 5,000 words to tell me something I already knew.
When
are you going to send me your bill? Where's the invoice?
No, that's completely free.
Well,
like your guy from.
Let's not pick on him. Let's not pick on him. It wasn't.
I just want to say one thing about him. Yeah. So he's convinced of his idea, but at the same time he's talking about the NHS. The nurses are underpaid. The nurses were going to have a struggle with shortage of nurses now. He's not really concerned about that, but he's convinced that his idea was good and he voted for the right reason. But he's just going to continue to search for new ideas, even though there's evidence staring him in his face. He's had a 19-day stint in hospital. People are taking care of him that won't be allowed to work in those positions going forward. But that's just, he's ignored it.
Well, that's just by the by, though, really, isn't it? I think I understand what you said about ownership, idea ownership and that kind of thing. But the notion that these people are still trusted. What did Boris Johnson say about the bill? The bill that we are now paying, the £50 billion that we're paying in order to start a negotiating process that will leave us with an inferior relationship with the world's largest single market to the one we have now, because now we're members. He said they could go whistle for it, and he's still in his job. And never mind that poor woman in that jail cell in Iran who's possibly going to stay there longer, although there was a glimmer of good news yesterday. I suppose you could argue that by using his bovine idiocy to bring the story back into the front pages, it may utterly unintentionally turn out to have a slightly happier ending. But he's still in his job. He said they could go whistle for it, demonstrating, I think in his case, a deliberate, willful misunderstanding. In David Davis's case, I don't think it's a willful misunderstanding. I don't think it's a tactical deception. I think it is just a failure to understand. And Ireland, listen again, as I say, on several occasions, I appreciate that you're going to want to shoot the messenger. And as long as it remains metaphorical and figurative, I have to take that. This is what I do for a living. I've pulled out of other work so that I can carry on speaking my mind about this particular and single issue. I'm sacrificing money, I'm sacrificing potentially career-enhancing opportunities, because there are so few places in the British media where you can say what you think even if it is completely evidence-based. At the BBC, you'd then have to bring someone on to say, actually, I think you'll find that unicorns do exist and the moon may well be made of cheese. So I will do it, and you can carry on shooting the messenger, but I will continue asking you about the message. And the message now is that Boris Johnson, when he said the EU could go whistle for their money, was either deliberately misleading you or, more likely, doing whatever would benefit him the most in the short term, regardless of the facts and evidence. David Davis, when he said that he could do a deal with Germany the day after the vote was taken, displayed that he didn't know anything, and he doubled down on it pretty much every day since, culminating in that appearance on Question Time in March, where he described what happened last night as being impossible. And he's still in charge. I don't know where it goes. I mean, what exactly does logic look like in Brexit Britain? You've got a man in charge of negotiating our departure who doesn't understand why we've just had to pay £50 billion. And that was actually a red herring. I was supposed to start talking about Ireland and reminding you that if you have been kind enough to listen to this programme for the last 18 months, you'll be pretty much the only people in Britain who haven't been taken by surprise by the Irish border question. A failure of democracy, a failure of accountability, and an epic failure of journalism. God, you're lucky to have me. I suppose it's progress of sorts when the news broke last night that we were going to pay £50 billion to meet our outstanding and future obligations to the European Union. That has no bearing whatsoever on the quality of trade deal that we'll get. It just constitutes one of the things that had to be agreed before we could start negotiating the deal that will by definition be inferior to the one we've already got. I no longer found myself wondering whether when we came on air today people would be displaying or echoing the sounds of pennies dropping and light bulbs going on above their heads across the country. It doesn't happen. It's never going to happen. It's too intractable. It's the most bizarre thing that's happened in our political lifetimes, is that the evidence continues to mount. A, that we're doing something daft, and B, that the people in charge of it haven't got a Scooby-Doo what they're playing at, and yet still the support remains pretty constant. Largely, I feel, because so much was invested emotionally in the debate. If so many sort of rows and arguments and fights, and the more you row about something, the harder it is to admit that you were wrong. And now you even end up still, I appreciate I'm more exposed to this than you are, but you've still got the "you lost, get over it" argument, to which you just reply by saying, what do you think you've won? What do you think you've won? And then you get some fairly kindergarten level attempts to define democracy and freedom. The notion that I've spent all of my adult life not enjoying the benefits of democracy. I mean, that's almost too absurd to even bother contemplating, but it's all that's left. I've spent all of my adult life somehow an unfree citizen of Britain. Right you are. Maybe I'm in a prison and I don't know it. 0345 606 0973. There's one phone line free. Talk to me. That's all we're doing today. Just talk to me about the whole shebang, but also about David Davis, because it seems to me that he's become almost the totem of the whole sorry process. A man who has clearly no idea what he's doing. You can't argue with that, can you? He clearly has no idea what he's doing, and yet he's in charge. John's in Mallorca. Oh, you lucky fella. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, how you doing, James? It's Menorca, by the way, the little island next door.
Oh, right. It's not my mistake, that. Someone else has written it on the screen, and the heads are going to roll. You can't get... never mind the Balearics. Get it right, will you? Go on, John.
Yeah, and you'll be pleased to know it's pouring down with rain.
Oh, I am actually quite pleased to know that, frankly. What have you rung in for?
No, I mean, I'm a rabid Remainer or Ramona, whatever they call us these days.
I think right is the word, actually.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And I've been watching this thing unfold from 1,000 miles away. Nearly everybody in my peer group back home in South East London wanted to leave Brexit for all the usual reasons that you outline every day. I woke up this morning, I saw the 50 billion headline. I was jubilant in my self-righteousness. I thought, this is it.
Bless you.
Is it. They're going to absolutely see it now.
Welcome to my world, John.
And I've spoken to a couple of people today, family, friends. No change of heart. None at all. It's a price worth paying. It's what we got to do. It's the bloody Europeans. Sorry, bad word.
That's right.
It's the Europeans' fault. And it just puts me in mind. You were talking about religion earlier on a little bit, about being a non-religious man or a semi-religious man. And I'm far from a Christian. But I do remember a bit in the Bible about that thing. There's none so blind as they that will not see, something like that.
Yeah, it rings a bell. I think you're right. And it's the Bible. I haven't got it. Go on.
People just aren't going to see it. People aren't going to get it. No matter what you say, no matter what I say, people are entrenched.
Why? Why do you think that is? Because I was thinking today there's one state in Australia has passed an assisted dying legislation, and I used to passionately argue against assisted dying, and I've completely changed my mind, even though I publicly did it with a woman who wanted to have it herself. I had the arrogance to argue with her about whether or not she should be able to make that decision. So I know how hard it can be to step back, but not on this scale, this collective scale.
It just reminds me sometimes, I don't know if you ever had a mate who bought a second-hand car years ago and it was a dodgy car, and everybody could see it except him. and when you told him that car was dodgy, he'd say, no, it's a good little runner.
Yeah. Or to be even ruder, perhaps a girlfriend that was running around behind his back and he refused to acknowledge what everybody else knew to be true.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
But, it's so frustrating.
But that's because she was really gorgeous, or that's because he'd never had a car before. I don't know what they get in return for the intractability. Do you?
No. But, I find it so frustrating to the extent where I'm at the point of giving up now. Just let it happen.
Well, I can't, I don't think. I'd like to. It'd make my life a lot easier, but I worry, and I don't know whether this is me being a little bit over the top, but I worry that if the same arguments and the same tactics employed by the same people are used with regards to the NHS or the welfare state, then we'll end up punching ourselves in the face all over again if we don't start standing up to these ludicrous political positions, which are essentially self-serving and nativist, exceptionalist.
You're a great man at making complicated things sound simple.
Well,
here's one for me. I run a holiday company of it, a walking holiday company.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
And since the pound dropped, since I charge in pounds, but I live in euros.
Right.
Like, so far, Brexit has cost me about £15,000 to £17,000. Right. Because of the drop in the pound.
Yes.
Now, what I've had to do to compensate for that is put the price of my holidays up by £100. So everybody pays £100 more than they used to, and now I earn the same money.
Yeah.
Now, I'm effectively a European company exporting to England, aren't I?
Yes. I guess. Exporting services, so to speak.
Yeah. I've put my holiday price up, which is going to cost anyone that comes on my holiday £100 more.
Yeah.
Now, people can do without one of my holidays. I know that. But what they can't do without is fruit from abroad, wine from abroad, cars from abroad, all from Europe.
Yeah.
Prices are going to have to go up. This is going to cost people money.
This is even without tariffs.
Yeah, but they still don't see it.
And if you were buying goods from a British manufacturer and dealing in euros at home, you would be piling in and placing orders like it was going out of fashion at the moment, because...
Wouldn't you just?
Well, and then of course they hold that up as evidence that Brexit's not having a negative impact on the economy. It's essentially, in the context of manufacturing, as things stand, and please God they pull something out of the hat to change it, essentially British manufacturing is currently having a closing down sale.
Yeah. I mean, we're a nation of eyes and sellers. I mean, it's all very well saying that a low pound means it's great for exports.
They don't know what that means when they say that. Yeah. They don't understand what it means. It's just another useful catchphrase to replace, I don't know, taking back control or build the wall or whatever it is, lock her up. What is it this week? Do you want to mention your company, John, or are you comfortable that you have enough customers?
Am I allowed to?
Of course you are, mate. It's my show.
They're called Balearic Outdoor Holidays, and we organise walking holidays on Menorca, Mallorca and Ibiza.
I'll tell you what, if I go to Ibiza on a walking holiday, that will constitute full circle from the days of my youth, John.
It was when we started working there as well. I know exactly what you mean.
It's 27 minutes after 11 is the time. Stephen is in... I was staying in continental Europe. Stephen is in northwest France. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Yes. Good morning, James.
Hello, Stephen.
No, it's a long time since I was in the kindergarten, because I'm in my 70s, so I voted for going into the common market in 1973, and I voted to stay in 1975. And for 20 years, we had a good deal until along came Maastricht and Jacques Delors and so forth, who wanted the whole thing to go political. And since then, I've been a leaver. And I couldn't believe my luck on June the 24th that we'd actually left.
And you're still happy?
Delighted.
What will your status be? What will your status be as an expat after March 2019?
I'm a French resident with a British passport.
So that doesn't cover it, though, does it? Your status hasn't been determined yet.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm married to a French girl as well, so I presume there's a bit more definition there. No, I'm very happy with the result. Very.
But I'm just wondering what your status will be after March of next year. Year after.
No change. I suspect no change.
You suspect? Can you?
No. I don't believe there'll be any change at all. We're coming up.
So you'll still be living in the European Union then?
Of course. Oh yeah.
Right.
I've no desire to come back to the UK, thanks to a dreadful road system which has never been sorted out. And
okay, so you're delighted that you're living in the European Union and delighted that people back in Britain won't be able to anymore.
Well,
talk me through that, will you, Stephen?
Nothing will change for them that they will notice, except perhaps they may be asked to show their passport at Calais.
But you don't want to live here?
No, I don't, no.
But you don't want us to live in the European Union? I just want you to talk us through that.
No. All right. Let me. You need a benchmark to refer to. Ever since we went political in 1992 with Maastricht, the EU have taken over in terms of...
Yes, but you want to live there?
No, I'm just living under the auspices of it, not having to have a euro in my pocket, of course. I'm happy with all that. The important thing is that Britain, of which I'm a great supporter, I'm a Brit through and through...
You just don't want to live here?
No, we get our independence back, and for the youth who were...
So what would be the big difference between me living in independent Britain and you living in unindependent France? What would be the things I can do that you can't?
I wouldn't think there would be anything that you could count on the fingers of one hand, frankly.
Well, I can't trade with France free, can I?
Why not?
Well, because we're leaving the free market.
No, listen.
I am listening.
One thing you don't understand is that the EU will need to give us as much as we've got now, or more or less, in order to keep everybody happy and make sure that all their suppliers and people who sell to the UK market now are happy. That'll have to happen.
Yes, it's not going to, though, is it? Because that's pretty much the raison d'etre of the single market and the customs union, which we've been adamant we're leaving. So if we want to trade with the single market, we have to abide by the rules and regulations that are voted for by the European Parliament and policed by the European Court of Justice.
Fine, so you're right, you're absolutely right.
I know.
We will, if we have to pay anything once we've left the single market, it will be imposed by those in Brussels, which just confirms what a good thing it was to leave in the first place.
No, it just confirms that we had the power and we shared it, and now we'll have none, and they'll have all of it. But I'm sorry to labour the point. I'm just interested why you don't want to live in an independent country. You want to stay living in, presumably, a country enslaved by European Union bureaucracy.
I am an independent Brit living abroad, and I'm happy to be that. I can come home anytime I like with my British passport, if I so desire. I have no wish to come back. There are too many people there already, falling over each other to...
people living here... You mean people living here who are from other countries?
Possibly. I mean,
like you, in France?
Well, that's right. I mean,
yes.
I'm
so you don't want to come back to Britain because there are too many people like you?
It could even be.
Have a good day, Stephen.
Good to talk. Bye.
There it is. That's why. It doesn't move. Not an inch. Not an inch. Painting lipstick across someone's forehead. I am talking undiluted twaddle. But it's good to talk. Bye. Sitting around the campfire, in a sense, trying to work out what's going on and really what's happened to Britain in the context of having senior politicians absolutely and categorically unfit for purpose, but apparently somehow unsackable. I think expecting them to demonstrate enough integrity or honesty to resign is completely pie in the sky. And we're not really talking about Boris Johnson today, although that description fits almost perfectly to him. We're talking more about David Davis, whose utter ignorance of the most fundamental precepts of the European Union that he is in charge of negotiating our withdrawal from is truly staggering. Truly staggering. So it's a very useful lens through which to examine the whole issue. Because if people aren't cross about the fact that a man who said in March that £50 billion was pie in the sky, still being in charge of a negotiation which has just agreed to pay £50 billion, they're never going to wake up or admit to the broader, the bigger error. And you end up talking to people in France who are immigrants and want to stay in the European Union but voted for everybody else back in Blighty to have to leave it because partly there were too many people here from elsewhere. Oh, I don't know. I don't like doing retrospective recaps of calls because I may be misrepresenting the poor fella, but my goodness me, it's what it sounded like to me. 11:38 is the time. Simon is in Hampstead. Simon, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning, James.
Hello,
Sorry,
Simon.
I'm still reeling from the last call you had from the gentleman in France. That really did... I'm kind of picking myself off the floor.
But this is normal. This is absolutely standard. There is nowhere else you can go. This is why people get cross with me for interrupting them and hectoring them, because they say things which don't bear the scantest scrutiny. And I don't understand why no one's doing it to the politicians, Simon. Why isn't David Davis getting kebabbed every time he pokes his head above the parapet on the telly or the radio?
I think, let me say quite clearly, David Davis is completely, totally hopeless. However, I think the problem goes far beyond David Davis. I think it just goes to the fact that we're never going to get a free trade deal, never will, because that would mean that we get the same benefits as we have whilst in the European Union, which of course cannot happen. So, however hopeless or brilliant David Davis may or may not be, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it would be nice if we had somebody we felt was vaguely competent rather than a complete idiot, but,
it's so binary, isn't it? Because what do people who think he's not a complete idiot think when they hear the stuff that we play them? What do they think? How do they process the fact that he's anything other than utterly ill-equipped for the job? I think complete idiot's a bit strong.
You see, I think we've got to the point now, I think there are people in this country, and it staggers me, who... If you said to them, look, we're going to crash out of the European Union, we won't have a deal, and what the result will be is that there will be, let's pluck a figure, 1 million more people unemployed, and that, our services will suffer massively because of the fall in taxes, etc. And you say to them, in light of that, if that were to be the case, would you still support leave? And they'll say yes.
Yes, they do now. You're right.
We've got sovereignty. I mean, yesterday on Channel 4 News, they had a report about Ford. And they had a guy, they interviewed the chief executive of Europe, Ford in Europe. And he said that no deal would be, in his words, catastrophic. They then went to show how the Ford system in terms of building cars currently works.
Yes.
And basically, you have engines made in Dagenham, and then, the actual cars are finished in Cologne. But in the meantime, components are moving between Portugal, France, Britain, Germany,
There's a thing called it's a no-delay supply chain or something like that, isn't it? So that literally...
They don't keep massive inventory, I mean, basically...
They've got about half a day's worth of goods in the warehouses, and if the supply chains are in any way disrupted, they won't be able to make cars.
Yeah, it's called just in time.
That's it, yes.
Yeah, but I mean... The thing is that, given the fact that businesses are obviously telling the government that this is the reality, I think this is why we're going for the 50 billion, because I think, the squeaky bums are coming in now. They're going to start getting pretty worried. And although they can sort of bluster and the bravura and all that, they know what's actually going on behind the scenes. They know full well that things are going very badly. The Irish border situation is completely insoluble. We know that.
I think it is. I hope it isn't. But I can't see any way past what's currently in place.
I think you have to ask yourself this, James. If there's no solution being posited 18 months after the referendum, it kind of suggests there isn't an answer.
And the distraction tactics are at their strongest when people claim that the current problems that the Prime Minister was having with his deputy would somehow impact on negotiations, because that displays an ignorance of the fact that the opposition party entirely endorses Leo Varadkar's attitude to the border debate, to the border negotiations. We're having increasingly surreal experiences. It's possibly why we don't talk about it every single day, because it is as if we're just doing flat Earth type arguments. The evidence now is irresistible, and yet people insist the Earth is still flat. The moon is made of cheese, and my unicorn will be here on Tuesday.
I mean, in a way, it's even worse than that. There was an article in the Times a few weeks ago, and it was called Hall of Mirrors. And basically, the writer said, we have a situation where 75% of the MPs in Parliament think that Brexit is an extremely bad idea.
And half of them are too frightened to say so.
Exactly. Well, no, it's not half of them, most of them.
Yeah.
And so we've got situations where people really, really don't think, and yet they're saying, yeah, we've got to plough on, we've got to plough on.
Yeah, why?
I think,
you lost, get over it. Get over it, Simon. You lost, get over it.
I think the point is, what I would love to see, and I know this won't happen, I'd love to see politicians having the guts to say, look, I think this is a really bad idea, and I'm not going to vote for something which I think will do such gross harm, notwithstanding the referendum. And you know what? Come the next election, I will accept the verdict of, and if I lose my seat, then, OK, I've lost my seat, but at least I've done what I think...
I've acted according to my integrity and my conscience, which is what our parliamentary democracy is built upon and which has been completely undermined.
We have a situation where people are now saying things which 2 years ago they would have been, totally unable to utter.
You mean the prominent Brexists or the Brextremists who are saying the polar opposite of what they said during the campaign?
Apparently IDS now, Ian Duncan-Smith now says that paying the 50 billion is all good.
And let's have another listen. Have we got another bit of David Davis? I don't know what this is, Simon, so let's do it together. It's a bit like doing a lucky dip or unwrapping a Christmas present. Ready?
Enjoy this.
Yes, come on.
We'd be better off in terms of global trade. We could do better trade deals than the European Union does on our behalf. We would not lose anything in terms of our access to European markets, because apart from anything else, the German car industry alone would have a 16 billion market put at risk. And Merkel, any German politician would not be able to allow that. So there's a very easy, not easy, but a very straightforward negotiation.
A very straightforward negotiation, and there's no way that the Germans would allow their car industry to suffer as a result of Brexit. Again, I don't know what you do for a living, Simon, but if you were so wrong about something, I presume that your position would be threatened.
I would think it would be. But I'm fortunately retired.
Yes, well, I fortunately retired living in Hampstead, as opposed to the previous caller, who was fortunately retired living in France, enjoying freedom of movement and precisely the kind of rights that he is or has voted to deny to future generations. And that, in a way, sums up everything. I am tempted, because I can see his funny little face, I'm tempted to read out this Daniel Hannan article in its entirety. Can we get some sort of rousing music behind it and then maybe do it as a podcast and we can send it to our Leave supporting friends at Christmas? Should we do this, or is it a little bit mischievous? I mean, if you'd written an article describing what post-Brexit Britain was going to be like, and you were a very prominent pro-Brexit campaigner, and then the article mysteriously disappeared from all internet archives, would you want me to read it out? Oh, go on then. And I think we should do this, because not only that, it's nearly December, isn't it? And we can agree on that, surely. There's not a sort of Leave lobby, is there, that's arguing it's actually the middle of June. Nothing would surprise me at this point in proceedings. And historically, we read out historically. It's a radio show, you muppet, historically. Traditionally, we like to read out Christmas round robins, but last year even, was a sadly fallow period. We hardly got any. So I'd like to remind you that we read out Christmas round robins. And to do that, I'm going to read to you an article written by the prominent Brexit campaigner Daniel Hannan, an MEP, of course, no less, a Conservative MEP, although very much on the UKIP wing of that party. And he wrote in the run-up to the referendum a rather powerful piece entitled, pretty straightforwardly, What Britain Looks Like After Brexit. And this was published on the 20th of June 2016. I think he's hoping that no one would remember, because it's been excised from all corners of the internet except a curious cached archive discovered by the magnificent J.K. Rowling, who knows a bit about fantasy fiction. So when she draws stuff to your attention, you should probably heed it. Cue the music, Jacob. It's the 24th of June 2025, and Britain is marking its annual Independence Day celebration. As the fireworks stream through the summer sky, still not quite dark, we wonder why it took us so long to leave. The years that followed the 2016 referendum didn't just reinvigorate our economy, our democracy and our liberty. They improved relations with our neighbours. The United Kingdom is now the region's foremost knowledge-based economy. We lead the world in biotech, law, education, the audiovisual sector, financial services and software. New industries from 3D printing to driverless cars have sprung up around the country. Older industries too have revived as energy prices have fallen back to global levels. Steel, cement, paper, plastics and ceramics producers have become competitive again. The EU, meanwhile, continues to turn inwards, clinging to its dream of political amalgamation as the euro and migration crises worsen. Its population is ageing, its share of world GDP shrinking, and its peoples protesting. We have the most comprehensive workers' rights in the world, complains Jean-Claude Juncker, who has recently begun his second term as president of the European Federation. But we have fewer and fewer workers. The last thing most EU leaders wanted, once the shock had worn off, was a protracted argument with the United Kingdom, which, on the day it left, became their single biggest market. Terms were agreed easily enough. Britain withdrew from the EU's political structures and institutions, but kept its tariff-free agreements and arrangements in place. The rights of EU nationals living in the UK were confirmed, and various reciprocal deals on healthcare and the like remained. For the sake of administrative convenience, Brexit took effect formally on the 1st of July 2019 to coincide with the mandates of a new European Parliament and Commission. In many areas, whether because of economies of scale or because rules were largely set at global level, the UK and the EU continued to adopt the same technical standards. But from 2019, Britain could begin to disapply those regulations where the cost of compliance outweighed any benefits. The EU's I can't do this anymore. Do you want me to carry on? Does the music run out? How convenient. Did I really reach the end of the music? It's almost like my brain was telling me that we were reaching it goes on. I mean, all of it. Financial services are booming, right? Other cities too have boomed, not least Liverpool and Glasgow. It's much longer than I realised. I'll give you the last paragraph. Cue the music, Jacob. Perhaps the greatest benefit, though, is not easy to quantify. Britain has recovered its self-belief. As we left the EU, we straightened our backs and our bananas, looked about us and realised that we were still a nation to be reckoned with. The world's fifth economy, already gone down, mate, and fourth military power, one of 5 members on the UN Security Council, just lost our seat on the justice equivalent, though, and a leading member of the G7 and the Commonwealth. We recalled, too, that we were the world's leading exporter of soft power, that our language was the most widely studied on Earth, that we were linked by kinship and migration to every continent and archipelago. That's good migration, that's not the bad stuff. We saw that there were great opportunities across the oceans, beyond the enervated Eurozone. We knew that our song had not yet been sung. I have no idea why Daniel Hannan appears to have removed all links to that article from the internet. It appears to completely nail where we are, almost as well as David Davis did when he was talking about the negotiations that he's currently in charge of. You remember that? You remember this? David Davis talking about the negotiating process that he's still in charge of?
We'd be better off in terms of global trade. We could do better trade deals than the European Union does on our behalf. We would not lose anything in terms of our access to European markets, because apart from anything else, the German car industry alone would have a 16 billion market put at risk. And Merkel, any German politician, would not be able to allow that. So there's a very easy, not easy, but a very straightforward negotiation.
So here in Dublin, the talk has moved back to the very thorny issue of Ireland's border with the UK. More on that in a moment. But it's not just here that the threat of new trade barriers is causing concern. Ford's European boss has warned that a no-deal Brexit could cost his company $1 billion a year in tariffs. Speaking exclusively to Channel 4 News, Stephen Armstrong, Ford's boss in Europe, the Middle East and Africa, said that a hard Brexit could be disastrous, and added that if Britain doesn't remain competitive, then Ford could rethink its plans to invest in Britain. So just how would the imposition of duties on imports and exports hit the company? Well, our business editor Siobhan Kennedy has been following the manufacturing of a Ford Fiesta from Dagenham to Cologne.
I am concerned. I'm very worried. It's important that we see a future in the UK that's competitive. A no deal would be a disaster really for not only for my business but for industry in general.
The River Rhine in Germany, the watery backbone of billions of euros worth of trade between Europe and the UK. Here also looms the near-century-old home of Ford Motor Company, a factory so large it has its own train station. Yet there's nothing old about this place. It's high-tech manufacturing at the cutting edge. Decades of deeply integrated supply chains that mean a car can be assembled from scratch in just 3.5 hours. Now Brexit is threatening to turn this finely tuned operation on its head at a huge cost to the company. Show me around.
Okay, look forward to it. I spend at least 4 or 5 hours a week in Brexit-related meetings, and then the team behind the scenes, of course, are working a lot on the implications of it.
There's been much chest beating about Brexit, so the man in charge of all Ford's operations outside America has agreed to let us in, to see for ourselves the dozens of cross-border journeys that go into the manufacture of just one of Ford's best-selling vehicles, the humble Fiesta.
We've spent 40 years putting a supply chain together that uses the kind of open European market, and it would be very difficult for us to quickly unwind them.
You're spending time which is all unproductive on something that you've already got sorted and working perfectly.
Yeah, that's true. So there's not a lot of value add to us, and I don't see significant opportunities exporting outside of Europe either.
To get a real sense of where it all begins, we have to leave Cologne and travel back to Britain to start our journey on another river, the Thames, and Ford's giant factory at Dagenham. It's dawn, and a huge cargo ship has arrived carrying hundreds of brand new cars from Germany. If you want an example of borderless, friction-free trade, then it doesn't get any bigger or better than this. 2 gigantic vessels arrive here every day carrying thousands of cars from continental Europe into the UK. If Brexit were to put the brakes on that free flow, then it wouldn't just be bad for Ford, it would hurt the entire British economy. The cars rolling off this mega container have come from the plant in Cologne, but they started out life here on the factory floor. Dagenham produces just over 900,000 diesel engines a year. And for anyone who thinks they come out of a box good to go, take a look at this. A warehouse so vast you need a vehicle to get round it. Thousands of boxes full of components, the majority of which are from Europe. In front of me here are about a dozen of the more than 2,000 or so components that go into one of these engines. For example, here are valves from Spain. We have clamps and bolts from France. And these are pumps imported from Italy. The point is that right now, all these thousands of components pass in and out of the UK with no tariffs whatsoever. It takes about 2.5 hours for an engine to travel around this assembly line, and 1,800 are produced here on a daily basis. We marked this one as ours. From Dagenham, it's on the boat, then truck. About 2 days later, the engines emerge in Cologne.
All right, these are the engines from Dagenham.
Okay.
In our warehouse, which we get every day, around about 600 engines.
Do you? 600 a day into here?
And you see here, this is
so ours left Dagenham, and here is our one. Here's our engine, all ready to go into the next stage of the process. And off it goes into the factory to be assembled. So far, so seamless. But what if we end up with a hard Brexit? You can really feel the flow of production here. It's constant, and it needs to be, because 1,400 cars come off this production line every single day. All those components from all those different countries. About a third of these Fiestas end up back in the UK. It's a seamless, tariff-free process. But if the UK crashes out of Europe without a deal, then privately, bosses here have calculated it could cost as much as $1 billion in tariffs. Now that's obviously financially crippling for Ford, but it also threatens the future of factories like Dagenham. $1 billion is a lot of money, isn't it, suddenly to have that thrust upon a business?
That is a very large number. Of course, we'll take whatever actions we think we need to take to mitigate that.
Things like what do you mean?
At the end of the day, the decision will be taken based on how competitive the UK is as a place to do business.
Does that mean wholesale moving production of engines somewhere else? Is it lines, or what does it look like?
Well, I think it's too early for me to say that we would shut all our facilities, pick them up and move them, but it would obviously make us question investments in the future.
Of course, a no deal could have an impact on staffing levels as well. Not that he'd mentioned that to the employees of the month gathered here. But isn't all this just posturing to put pressure on the government to get the kind of deal he wants to see? The UK is, after all, Ford's third biggest market globally, after the US and China.
As I said before, we like being in the UK, and I'll do what I can to protect the business there, because it's a great place for us to operate. It's a big market for us. But if it's not competitive, we'll do what we need to do.
We'll do what we need to do. That's more than a veiled threat, but he says the stakes are high.
A no deal would be a disaster really for not only for my business but for industry in general in the UK. So I don't think no deal is an option that anybody should be happy with or pushing for.
The Christmas markets are just opening in Cologne, but it's the car market here that's lacking festive cheer. Brexit, the unwanted gift they simply can't return.
Very straightforward negotiation that hasn't actually started yet. But he's still in charge. But why, actually? Why is he still in charge? I'll take any answer you've got to that. 03456060973 is the number you'll need if there's ever any gaps on my switchboard. There's one there, quick. Line 5, grab it now. 03456060973. John's in Lancaster. John, what's going on?
Oh, it's just an almighty confidence trick, isn't it, really?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I've tried to be sympathetic to people who try to leave. I've tried to be angry at them, worried, concerned, and all these other bits and pieces in between. And you asked this really interesting question about why is it that people are still so enamoured with what Davis is doing and refusing to see the absolute farce that he seems to be presiding over.
Yes, you lost. Get over it. That's all I've got now. What have you won? What have you won?
Yes. Yeah, Brexit means Brexit, and all these other wonderful mantra-like phrases that they cling to desperately. The thing is, if we try and strip this away and look at it more from a decision-making process, you think back through the campaign, the emotions that were engaged, the furore that was felt on both sides. People made an awful lot of decisions based on negative emotions. I'm getting away from that. The problem is, when you make those kinds of decisions, it's a hell of a lot more difficult to climb down from them.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem that a lot of people are having at the moment is, yes, they're being confronted with reports every day of we're now having to pay $50 billion for this. We're now going to have to look at free trade and free movement with X, Y, and Z countries, which don't really kind of fit with the immigration argument. But we're going to ignore that as well, based on the fact that we can't quite bring ourselves to admit we maybe made the wrong choice.
Why is it so hard to do? Well, it's that old Mark Twain line about it being easier to fool people than it is to persuade them that they've been fooled, which is why I've stopped doing the kind of show. I mean, sometimes it just happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you take a call from a fellow living in France who doesn't want to live in Britain but voted for Britain to leave the European Union while he wants to carry on living in it, then you can't help but be. And the fellow in the Isle of Wight who absolutely hates federalism but doesn't know what federalism is. You can't help it with those. But instead, by focusing on David Davis, by looking at what the cheerleaders, Daniel Hannan, what these people have done, and not the racist liars, not those people who delivered that xenophobic vote with their disgusting posters, but the ones who were supposed to be the clever ones or the sensible ones. What when they are revealed to have been talking out of their posteriors, how can people not recognise that? That's what confuses me.
Because, unfortunately, the thing is, everything is bound up in the same decision. We were offered the binary choice. And an interesting point you made earlier about democracy is the knowledge base that's required to live in an active democracy. This is a binary choice, a simple yes or no, but not with the huge amount of information that was actually needed behind it to be able to make that decision with the knowledge required. Now, of course, you go back to the emotion that was the driving force of this, and the feelings of, Europe, they must be angry at something or someone.
Yes.
Which, let's face it, so many people who voted Leave, I can probably understand.
I can. If you feel really, really let down, and you feel left behind, and you feel squeezed, and you're fearful of immigration because you've never met many immigrants, and so you think they're all cavorting in balaclava helmets trying to nick your pension. I get all of that, but now the dust has settled and reality is beginning to bite, and some people are still denying that they've got teeth marks on their buttocks.
Simply, James, and I know you're probably going to want to move on shortly, but the point is this: if people are in a situation where they're now being told, do you know what, you went into a voting booth...
Oh, mate, you've blown it. I left it. I tried it for the crescendo. I told you at 10 o'clock this morning, actually just before, just that little spiel I do while Nick's still in the studio at 9:59, that my old mucker from school, Peter Foster, who is probably now leading the field on Brexit coverage, the Brussels European correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, doing sterling work, and he got the scoop on this so-called divorce deal. And I said to you at 10 o'clock this morning that I imagine someone's put a call into him and given him a steer on this to deflect attention from the debacle that unfolded in Parliament yesterday with regard to David Davis's so-called impact assessment statements. These are the 58 sectoral analyses that he had reportedly commissioned to describe the impact of Brexit on 58 separate sections of British business, British life. That was about 2 months ago that he first started talking about how detailed and how good they were. A month later, he denied that they existed, despite the fact that some MPs were simultaneously claiming to have read them, and then forced by Parliament. Remember sovereignty, that thing that they're supposed to care so much about? Forced by Parliament to publish them, he attempted to fudge the issue of transparency, accountability, and indeed sovereignty by publishing ludicrously redacted and edited versions of them that didn't cut the mustard with proper parliamentarians. And I include Jacob Rees-Mogg in that category, even though he's a little bit absurd in a lot of areas. When it comes to slightly arcane parliamentary procedure, he has a degree of scholarship, and he's not happy about this either. So it's not a Remain Leave argument. It is a parliamentary versus anarchy argument, because what the Brexit Secretary has essentially tried to do with these analyses that he said he'd commissioned 2 months ago, then denied existed, then claimed weren't doing what he said they did, and now tries to publish in a heavily redacted version, he is probably in contempt of Parliament if he doesn't publish them completely. The select committee that would expect to scrutinise them has been told by the Secretary of State that he doesn't trust them, but we're supposed to trust him. I think Rees-Mogg's on that committee, isn't he? It's the one that's chaired by Hilary Benn. And David Davis has said the reason why you can't see these analyses, these impact assessments, is because I don't know what you'll do with the information. They've also tried to argue that if they published them, it would somehow help the other side, a position that's somewhat undermined by the fact that the other side, and I hate that language, it's not a question of sides, it's a question of trying to make the best of a bad lot, and they've been quite kind to us in that process. The other side has published lots, dozens. So theoretically, I'm a little bit possibly Byzantine now in my reasoning. Theoretically, David Davis's argument is that if you publish your impact assessments, it helps the other side. The other side have published theirs, which, according to David Davis's own analysis, must help us enormously, which would mean, if he was right about anything, that we would currently be running rings around the European Union in these negotiations. And I don't think anyone would argue that we are, least of all David Davis, who was adamant in March that £50 billion was the pie-in-the-sky figure, but apparently has now signed off on it. So when the lad at the Telegraph took a call last night, giving him a heads up on this, it's a cautious speculation at 10 o'clock this morning that they were just hoping to draw attention away from what Davis has done. Then you just heard Simon in the news bulletin at 12 saying that Barnier now denies that this deal has actually been signed off at all. So it becomes a balloon, really, that was launched so that we'd all look at it, look at the balloon, and not look at David Davis. And even if you were looking at David Davis and you were recognising the incompetence and the crassness of his demeanour, let alone his negotiating position, you probably wouldn't land any punches anyway, because we've got incontrovertible evidence that he doesn't know what he's doing. I've played you 2 absolutely stone-cold examples of it. So even if we came up with another example, it probably wouldn't do for him, except for the fact that if he is found to have been in any way in contempt of Parliament, then just think about that for a minute. Mention on occasion just how nuts things are, how we've lost accountability, how democracy itself is being horribly undermined, how parliamentary sovereignty is facing its most profound threat, probably since Simon de Montfort, because we are insisting that our members of Parliament, our elected representatives, vote against what they consider to be the interests of their own constituents in about 75% of cases. We are ordering them, or Paul Dacre is, Rupert Murdoch is, ordering them to vote against what they consider to be the best interests of their constituents. That makes a mockery of democracy, and yet all the people in favour of leaving the European Union keep citing democracy as a reason for wanting to do it. So David Davis has insisted that he can't publish the impact assessments because it would help the other side. The other side has published a raft of impact assessments in various sectors, but it doesn't seem to have helped David Davis at all. He seems to struggle some mornings to... I presume he struggles to do up his shoelaces, frankly, without help, without an aid. And he got his knickers in a right old twist, apparently, because he wasn't allowed to commission an RAF jet to fly him around the world privately. And he's still got his job. So, tempting though it is to move on and contemplate happier stories, like, oh, I don't know, polar ice caps melting. I want you to tell me why you think he's still in his job. One day, maybe we'll ask why these questions aren't the only questions that are being asked. But of course, a large part of the answer to that is that a lot of people who do what I do for a living, I shoot their mouth off in public, either on broadcast media or in print. The massive majority, about 80% of them, told you to vote to leave. So they have an emotional investment in pretending that this disaster isn't happening. They have an emotional investment in pretending that the chief Brextremists, the chief cheerleaders, the Davises, the Johnsons, the Goves, they have a vested interest in pretending that they're not utterly incompetent and fairly close to corrupt in terms of saying one thing and then doing another. Gove is speaking at the weekend about the blessed sponge of amnesia having wiped his memory of some meeting with a so-called think tank person. Incredible, actually, when you think about it, but utterly plausible when you look at it through the lens of Brexit. So let's just do that for a bit and see where we go, because we've got a PMQs coming up. Theo is watching it at the moment so that you don't have to, and it's the Deps today. It's the deputies. It's Damien Green versus... it'd be Emily Thornberry, wouldn't it? Does Emily Thornberry do PMQs when Corbyn's... Well, we'll find out at 12:45 when Theo Ushwood joins us. Before that, your answer to this, whether you're a ranting Ramona or whether you're a bonkers Brextremist, why is David Davis still in the job when we can all agree that he doesn't know what he's doing? Why is he still there? Scott's in Cologne in Germany. Scott, what would you like to say?
It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise.
I'd just like to start with this with a bit of an apology to younger people in Britain.
Go on.
The man you had on in France infuriated me.
Stephen.
To the people who didn't hear him, he basically said he's very proud to be British, but lives in France, has no intention of going back to Britain because, well, he didn't think the roads were very good and he thought it was overpopulated. Well, I'm somebody who lives in Germany, and I love Britain, and I really do want to go back one day. And I don't care about overpopulation because there's enough green space, thank you very much. But I'd like to make an apology to younger people in Britain who will not get the opportunities that I've had to come to the continent without any questions asked, not whether I have a job or not, and the chances that the man in his 70s in France has, because younger British people will not get that. And I'm very sorry for them. I really am.
Well, you don't owe them an apology. It's not your fault.
It feels like
it's an expression of sympathy. Well, we haven't let people down. They've been let down by the people that encourage them to vote to punch themselves in the face, and indeed to punch their children in the kidneys.
So many of us were complacent.
Yeah, that's true.
Go and vote. I went and voted. I don't know if your man in France went and voted because you had to be.
No, I think he did. I think he did.
Out of the country. But we've let everybody down, and the people who will not now admit their mistakes because they know it deep down, that they've made a mistake, right? They're too proud to say it. And it doesn't help with papers, I won't even mention them, the normal papers in Britain, who are very pro-Brexit, who only talk about the bad things about the EU, and there's a lot of bad things about the EU, by the way.
Of course there are, absolutely.
So I apologise to young British people who were 16 or 17 when the referendum took place, and I'm gutted for you, because you're not going to get the same opportunities that I had.
Were you not paying attention to Daniel Hannon's lyrical depiction of what the country's going to look like in 2025?
Yeah, I was welling up with emotion because it's about as likely as the Earth being flat. Daniel Hannon is incredible. I mean, don't forget this is the same man who posted on Twitter about his fantastic walks in the English countryside, and then took stock photos from Google. So if anybody's still thinking that he's a trustworthy person, maybe you should look into his social media history.
Well, that's a valid observation. I'm familiar with the story you refer to. Give me a quick heads up on what sort of conversations you have with German friends in Cologne about what we're doing back in Blighty.
They're very sympathetic to people like me and you.
Yes.
And they're also quite sympathetic with the people who have voted to leave.
Yes.
But when David Davis came over to Berlin about 3 or 4 weeks ago and was given quite a few questions from the German media, they're just laughing at us. They're looking. There was a lot of sympathy at the beginning, and now they're just looking at us and shaking their heads.
Well, because we still seem to have faith in these people in charge of the negotiation. So they simultaneously can have sympathy for the population, but increasing notice, if you like, of the absurdity of putting our faith in people like David Davis.
I can't believe he's still in the job. I can't believe Boris Johnson's in the job. But then again, I couldn't believe that Donald Trump was still elected after his comments.
It's got worse with Donald Trump while we've been on air.
About the tweets that he's sent.
Have you seen this? It's been retweeting Britain First. The President of the United States of America.
What's he doing reading tweets from a fringe group like that in the first place?
Desperately looking for some Islamophobic rhetoric to distract from the fact that the Russian investigation and his support of an apparent paedophile in Alabama it might register even with the most bovine of his core support. Personally, I don't think he's got anything to worry about. I think they're going to elect an alleged paedophile in Alabama, and all the people who bang on about grooming gangs and all that kind of thing when they're in an Islamophobic mood will just be cool with it. Because that's where we are. Scott, apology accepted, although, I repeat, not necessary. Remember, you are not allowed to see, ordinary people like you and me, a single word of David Davis's secret Brexit impact studies. That is democracy, that is sovereignty, that is taking back control. But given the catalogue of incompetence that we've been disseminating today, I'd love to know why you think David Davis in particular has still got a job. Let's go down to Devon, where Mark is waiting in Torquay. Mark, what would you like to say?
I classify myself as a proud Remoaner. In fact, I'm a bit of a Remainiac. In fact, so much so I pull the pants off everybody, so I really stop fucking.
At least I get paid. At least I get paid for it.
No, I just believe it. We're getting onto religion again, aren't we?
No, we're not, because it's a rational basis for your position, and that's the big difference.
I think there is. On a side point, the guy who hosts that site, that Hannon's article, he claims he misfiled it by accident, and it's since popped up on his site again.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
This morning.
So it wasn't... just this morning. So it hadn't... well, that's good to know, isn't it? Well, thank goodness for that. By bringing it back into the public sphere, we've managed to get it republished. I'm sure Daniel will be delighted. Why has Davis still got a job?
I don't know, even his own side hate him. He's been described by Dominic Cummings as thick as mint.
Dominic Cummings perceived as the brains behind Brexit, who has also deleted, I think, all of his social media presence in the last few months.
Yeah, vain as Narcissus and lazy as a toad. So I think it's probably because you broke it, you fix it. Or you own it. So I think that's why you've still got a job. It's interesting to read Hannon's little polemic. It's wonderful, because if you go through it, it's demonstrably rubbish.
Well, let's do the favourite bit. I lost the will to live before I got to the end, and Jacob only had 2.5 minutes of Jerusalem ready. Shall I give you the paragraph that I think is the most perfect illustration of what you've just said, Mark?
Yeah, I mean where he flies off into fantasy unicorn land?
No, when he talks about what would already have happened by now. Rather,
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do you need the music, or do you want to hum along?
I'll just.
Let's get the professionals in. I'm not going to rely on you. You just. During the first shut up at the back, will you? I'm trying to perform, Mark. For heaven's sake, ready?
Go on.
During the first 12 months after the vote, Britain confirmed with the various countries that have trade deals with the EU that the same deals would continue. It also used that time to agree much more liberal terms with those states which had run up against EU protectionism, including India, China and Australia. These new treaties came into effect shortly after independence. Britain, like the EFTA countries, now combines global free trade with full participation in EU markets. That, of course, was supposed to have happened by June of this year, Mark.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And despite the fact that, in response to us getting a free trade deal with India, they now want complete freedom of movement. So that, if we're going to trade freely with them, we have to educate all their students at our universities.
What constitutes a silver lining? I've got one, oddly, it might not sound like much, but I've just had an email off him, and I've made friends as a result of this process, and chief among them is my friend Nico Ladinis, who's one of the most honoured chefs in this country, but a true European, and he just emailed me to say it would require Socrates, Plato or Aristotle to understand the logic of Stephen, that Englishman who lives in northern France. I have now heard it all, and nothing will ever surprise me again. So there's a silver lining. First of all, I have the honour of having made the acquaintance of Nico, and secondly, he has now lost the ability to be surprised, which means nothing will take him by surprise ever again, which you could, I think, argue was a positive, couldn't you? So are you there? Nothing will ever surprise you about your fellow man?
Nothing will ever surprise me about the fact that they continue to delude themselves on an almost fanatical basis. No, nothing surprises me anymore.
How can you do that in a charitable way?
I obviously can't. That's why people tell me to shut up.
Yes, and that's why it becomes condescending, sneering, and get over it. Whereas I'm genuinely trying to find a way to say to someone who is susceptible to reason, look, here's a hatful of reason. Eat it.
Well, I think you need no look further than Grimsby. I mean, Hannon makes the point that the viability of our commercial ports, we are now a centre for world shipping. Grimsby certainly wants to be. That's why they want to opt back into the EU as quickly as possible.
I've just seen reports that the 7 major trade bodies for the construction industry are asking for similar treatment. They want settled status to be afforded to construction workers because they're facing a massive, massive shortage. It's not like that. It's not like we need to build a load of houses anytime soon, though. So it's not all bad.
Yeah, well, if you look at Hannon when he says energy prices at global levels, steel, we hardly produce any steel anymore. It's all Chinese. That's why we're susceptible to Chinese steel dumping, depressing our prices.
I sense, Mark, that you don't like Daniel Hannon very much.
I think Daniel Hannon knows his own mind very, very well. I just wish he was more honest with himself.
With himself. That's nicely put. For me, I think you feel more unhappiness with the people who seemed to be sane in the run-up rather than the ones who clearly weren't. That's why the notion that there were some some intellectual Brexiters possibly explains why people were complacent and not fully recognise. Even people who were minded to vote Remain didn't fully recognise what the impact of Leave would be, so they didn't campaign and they didn't bang the drum as hard as they should have done. Mark, we'll talk again. Alex is in County Derry. Well, it's not going to affect you, is it? This old Brexit business. Northern Ireland seems to be getting a free pass on all the complications and troubles that we're facing at the moment. What would you like to say, Alex?
Well, getting back to the whole referendum, Cameron, did he not call this referendum an unnecessary referendum in the first place, with hoping to remain? That's what he canvassed, to remain. He then he resigns as a consequence because he didn't get what he wanted. Theresa May steps in, also a great advocate of remaining.
Well, not a great advocate, a very quiet advocate, but yes, I mean, that's the side she was on. She was pretty clear when she spoke to Goldman Sachs about her understanding of the economic impact it would invite.
Well, yes. Well, look, at the end of the day, there's been more discussion about this now than there was prior to the vote being taken. It'd be great to have a rerun of this, and this time with a clarification and the actual pros and cons, the facts, in other words, given to the ordinary people, if you want to call it that, not brains of Britain, but just the normal working man and woman in the street.
I feel a lot better equipped to vote now than I did before, but of course the people who were most ill-equipped to vote last time are the ones that are desperate not to do it again, and I still don't get that. Do you get that? Do you understand this kind of urge not to consider the facts and consider your position?
They've made a mistake, and I think because they were not fed the correct information, they made a blunder. And they're not prepared to admit it. That's not unlike the Tories anyway. They don't like admitting anything they got wrong. Everything's correct. Everything's rosy in the garden, and they back each other up.
Anything that's not going well, that's all because of immigrants.
Well, of course, look, exactly. You and I spoke about this away at the beginning, and it was exactly that reason we came up with. They don't want immigrants. Well, I mean, we're still going to get immigrants in any event. And all right, in quantities that are acceptable, and the right professions that we need.
Well, there's some fear that we won't get that, actually, because you can't make people come here, Alex. That's the point that people always miss in the immigration debate, is that people come here because it's an attractive place to come, and a large part of that would be the warmth of the welcome. It doesn't feel like a very warm welcome anymore that Britain offers to our friends and family overseas.
What about this chap? He hasn't got a clue either. And your researcher said, what did I think of Dale? I said, well, in my position where I worked, my feet wouldn't have touched that. But
they just couldn't have done, could they? Couldn't have done. It's going to be a really easy, straightforward negotiation. We'll be able to sign deals with Germany the day after the vote, and £50 billion is a pie-in-the-sky figure. We'd be like, boom, 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 you're fired. But he's still there.
He's still, yeah, and probably will be.
Well, I think he'll resign.
Well, he'll swallow his pride and throw the towel in.
I don't know. I don't think he'll swallow his pride. I think resigning will be the only way he can cling to it. I think he'll resign, blame it on the European Union or on a failure to support him properly from number 10 and walk away, because then he can claim, like they all do, that if they'd been in charge it would have been better. It's the one thing, I think, that explains Theresa May's decision, is she put them in charge and said, you sort this out, naively presuming that they might throw their arms up and admit that they couldn't. They're never going to do that. They're always going to scapegoat, pass buck and blame.
That's right.
That's my favourite law firm, that, Alex. Scapegoat, pass buck and blame. They deal with all my legal inquiries.
Actually, I wasn't there on the day that it was taken. Anything at all. But don't confuse them with the facts. Our mind's made up.
I think there's something in that. You lost, get over it. OK, what did you win? Tell me what you won. And don't use words you can't explain the meaning of. What did you win? I won the right to stay in France, while people in Britain won't have the right to move here. Well done, mate. Thank you, Alex. 12:30 is the time. It's consistency and truth that matter. It's why, for example, Donald Trump is so committed now to trying to undermine both by describing journalism that's accurate as fake news. It gives him possibly a chance to portray the mounting evidence of Russian influence on his campaign as somehow being fake. The only person that he's never accused of lying is Vladimir Putin. Isn't that incredible? But in the context of Brexit, and I make no apology for conflating the two, I think they speak to very, very similar movements. And in the context of Brexit, it's the truth that died last June. Because all of these prominent people, and I mean the proper politicians, the parliamentarians, that supported it, they've all sacrificed their integrity upon the altar of what? I still don't know. Here, for the third piece of evidence, you haven't heard this before, is the Secretary of State for Brexit, David Davis, speaking in 2012.
Let me just explore this a little further. So you're in favour of a referendum?
Absolutely.
Would you be in favour of an in-out referendum?
Well, I think what we've got to do is have the negotiation first. And then, yes, when it comes down to it, in the final analysis, it probably does have to be an in-out referendum once the people have seen what the new deal is. But you've got to have a new deal first.
There he is. I mean, what do you do now? You've got to have a new deal first. So a statement, I would argue, of glimmering obviousness. How did we vote on not knowing what we were voting for? I don't care, James. I know. You lost. Get over it. No, but what did you vote for? I voted to get out of the Euro. Well, what will that mean? Oh, I don't know, and I don't care. And that is not meant to be an insult, but it is just true, isn't it? I don't know what I voted for, and I don't care because slogan, fish, passport, sovereignty. It's incredible. And just play that again. It's like the David Davis greatest hits. This. And I can tell you now, we've got a lot more. We're going to keep them coming as well in the coming weeks.
Let me just explore a little further. So you're in favour of a referendum?
Absolutely.
Would you be in favour of an in-out referendum?
Well, I think what we've got to do is have the negotiation first. And then, yes, when it comes down to it, in the final analysis, it probably does have to be an in-out referendum once the people have seen what the new deal is. But you've got to have a new deal first.
That was when he had faith in the British people or held them in high regard. There's no way we can ask them to vote without knowing what the two choices are. Then I suppose the rise of UKIP made him realise that actually you can treat the people like complete cretins and they're going to thank you for it. They're not going to criticise you for it. So within 4 years of that television programme, David Davis was foursquare behind the idea of a referendum in-out without any knowledge, evidence or understanding of what out would mean. Let's do all three. Let's do them in order, because this is probably my favourite bit. This is him describing the likelihood of this £50 billion deal, which his own department have now signed off on as recently as last March.
I don't know about 50 billion. I mean, I've seen 40, 50, 60. I've seen no explanation for any of them. So I don't think we're going to be seeing that sort of money change hands.
Not that sort of money, but some sort of money.
Look, we have said before...
And he is still in charge. I don't think we're going to see that sort of money change hands. No, well, we are now. Are you still in charge? Oh, yes. I'm in charge of trade. Trade what? Trade negotiations.
We'd be better off in terms of global trade. We could do better trade deals than the European Union does on our behalf. We would not lose anything in terms of our access to European markets, because apart from anything else, the German car industry alone would have a 16 billion market put at risk, and Merkel, any German politician, would not be able to allow that. So there's a very not easy, but a very straightforward negotiation.
So he wanted a referendum, but only once the public had been given a proper understanding of what leaving the European Union would mean. Reverse ferret. He believed that Angela Merkel would somehow intervene to ensure that despite leaving the free market, we managed to get all of its benefits with none of its responsibilities. Full reverse ferret. And he considered £50 billion to be an almost laughably absurd figure to cover the responsibilities that we are already subject to. 1, 2, 3. And he's still got a job. Why? Even if you are on completely the other side of the fence on this one. I'm not going to quiz you about why, because that's not fair anymore. It's like a blood sport, actually, asking people to explain what the words they use mean or why they voted to deny somebody young the freedoms to move to France that you yourself have enjoyed. It's a blood sport. So we don't even need to go there. Why do you think David Davis has still got a job when I've just given you 3 incontrovertible items of evidence that he's unfit for purpose? John's in Watford. John, what do you think?
Well, I think the entire government now is unfit for purpose, and David Davis in particular. I mean, you mentioned, or you played a clip from what he said in 2012. Interestingly, he also said in 2012, if a democracy cannot change its mind, it ceases to be a democracy.
This was when he was a massive campaigner for transparency, so much so that I think he resign his seat and call a by-election to make a point to Theresa May about transparency, and yesterday he refused to let the British people see these so-called impact assessment statements.
That's true, and what's interesting also is that the European Parliament has published about 24 Brexit impact statements, which are very comprehensive.
The mugs. That means we can read them and run rings around them in negotiations, according to David Davis's logic.
Well, I don't think there's anything that's been marked out in black on the secret Brexit impact reports he's got that the EU doesn't know.
Of course
it's
not.
A complete whitewash that he should say that he can't publish them. The fact is that no one gave informed consent for Brexit in last year's referendum. We simply didn't know. We weren't told about these costs last year. We were only told about money we'd be getting back, which was all based on lies. And as for Mr. Davis, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He said when he became the Brexit secretary, he boasted that Britain would be able to secure free trade areas 10 times the size of the EU. And it had to be pointed out to him that that would be 1.5 times bigger than the planet's entire economy.
I don't laugh anymore when I get reminded of these things. I laughed at the time because I presumed at the time that this evidence would coalesce to create a very, very compelling case for changing our mind. Something that David Davis, pre-Brexit, would have been very much in favour of. Indeed, as you've reminded us, he'd have considered it a cornerstone of a functioning democracy, the freedom to change your mind. But hey, it's all post-Brexit now, John. Why is he still in his job?
Well, I think because the government is weak, they have got not any majority. I think even a landslide majority government would be a little bit fearful and hesitant to take the country on the route it's now taking it, a permanent change of the country with a government that has zero majority in the House, apart from the help with the DUP. So I think that the government feels weak. If the government was strong, they would have got rid of him by now. But they fear they can't get rid of another minister. The whole government could come down.
So they're all loose threads then, from the Foreign Secretary down. Tug that one thread and the whole suit falls apart.
I
think you might be right, actually.
I think that will happen.
Because the weakness of the government is such that any sort of fracture, and what they have now is Theresa May's worst nightmare. I think this is why she called the election, to avoid this odd meeting in the middle of hardcore leave and rational remain. But rational remain saying, why on earth are we paying £50 billion to leave an organisation that serves our purposes and improves our prosperity? And the hardcore leavers are saying, why on earth are we paying £50 billion? I don't understand this any better than David Davis does, so I think we can walk away without paying. And any fears you have that you might be slightly misrepresenting the position of the so-called Brextremists or the hard leavers should be exploded by the memory banks of men like John, who can just remember stuff that they've said in the past that has turned out to be wholly untrue. You pick one, any one of them, and you can find absolutely stone-cold proof that they now argue the polar opposite of what they argued when they were after your vote. And we still let them get away with it. That's the biggest mystery of all. Roger's in Mill Hill. I don't think I've spoken to a single woman today, Roger, which just reminds me of my 20s. Why do you think that is?
Should I change the pitch of my voice?
No, it's too late now.
Yeah, absolutely. I was listening to you earlier, as I always do. You were talking about David Davis's crassness. I have to apologise because I broke off to watch Prime Minister's Question Time.
It's Theo you need to apologise to. He watches it so that you don't have to. But I understand in these frantic times why the temptation was there. What are you going to report?
It would be interesting to hear what Theo has to say about this, because Damien Green is standing in for Theresa May today, and Kenneth Clarke stood up, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but he said that he mentioned the 50 billion reported in the papers, and isn't that good news? Doesn't that mean that we can now move on to discuss more important issues in terms of getting a deal? Damien Green replied by, of course, saying that, you can't believe always what you read in the papers. David Davis was sitting either next to him or one beyond that, grinning, laughing.
It's still a game, isn't it? It's still a game.
It's still a game. When Damien Green then said that he is doing his very best to secure the best deal he can for us, he raised his eyebrows in a gesture that suggests that, well, that's what he thinks. What happened to statesmen? What happened to real politicians?
Well, you mentioned one at the beginning of your call.
Indeed. Unfortunately, there are a few left. I have always been a Tory voter. I didn't at the last election because I could not go along with this, and it didn't mean very much. But
sure.
But I will not vote for them again. This is just utter
insanity. Insanity crossed with intransigence, crossed with incontinence.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go. We got there in the end, Roger.
I'd mention that because it was actually disgusting to see it.
Yes, I didn't appreciate the horseplay that often characterises PMQs, but in the context of what happened yesterday with regard to those impact assessments and what has happened overnight with regard to reports of that bill being settled, that figure being reached, and of course with the 3 items of evidence that we've played repeatedly on the programme today demonstrating beyond any shadow of reasonable doubt David Davis's hypocrisy, dishonesty and unfitness for purpose. What else can you do to see him grinning in the House of Commons at a time when he presides over a process that he appears to know even less about than... I think I've got items of furniture who've got a better grasp of European Union law than David Davis does. Roger, thank you. So we'll catch up with Theo imminently. I'm just going to read you the tweet that I sent out at 8:05 this morning, because it framed the basis for today's programme. And I haven't heard a single word of dissent to unpick it. Nobody, sadly, rang me to tell me why this is good news, but I think more pertinently, nobody rang me to dispute the logic displayed herein. We are paying tens of billions of pounds to leave the world's largest free trade area while simultaneously surrendering all of our ability to define its rights and regulations. And we're doing it all so that we can hopefully, but by no means definitely, soon start negotiating an inferior arrangement with that self-same world's largest free trade area. You lost. Get over it. We will park the Brexit bus momentarily and turn our attention to broader political questions, although I wouldn't be surprised if the bus starts honking its horn fairly early in Theo Usherwood's summation of events at PMQs earlier this afternoon.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it, when everybody's talking about that Brexit bill, MPs decide that they don't want to talk about that Brexit bill. Prime Minister Theresa May is currently in Jordan at the start of a 3-day visit to the Middle East, and so responsibility for PMQs has been handed, or was handed, to her de facto deputy, the Cabinet Office Minister Damien Green. That is, of course, despite the fact that he is under investigation for sexual harassment. Now, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, who was deputising for...
Is he under investigation for the harassment allegations or for the pornography apparently found? Is it the whole shebang?
The whole shebang.
Reportedly found on his computer, yes. We should add for the...
Yes.
Great. So he is the de facto Prime Minister in Parliament today?
Yes.
While under investigation? Oh,
yes.
Make it stop, Theo.
The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, of course, is the deputy for Jeremy Corbyn in these situations.
She's the woman who had to resign from Ed Miliband's front bench because she tweeted a photograph of a house covered in...
You're getting ahead of me, Jason.
Am I spoiling your punchline?
Yes, you are, actually. There is literally a punchline to this.
I don't know why you put up with it. I really don't. Seriously. Carry on. I'll shut up.
She started with this self-deprecating gag, which dates back those 3 years to when she was campaigning in Rochester, and she tweeted a picture of 2 England flags hanging from a terraced house, provoking accusations of snobbery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me first join the Secretary of State in congratulating the RAF on its anniversary and congratulating Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on their engagement. That's one Anglo-American couple we on this side will be delighted to see holding hands. I'm sure that Prince Harry, the patron of Rugby Football League, will be joining all of us in supporting the England team in the World Cup final on Saturday. And I, for one, will of course be waving my St George's flag.
Rugby Football League, bless her. We are in the World Cup final of the Rugby League on Saturday, but it's odd, it doesn't really get reported south of Doncaster. Go on.
Whitehall investigation is currently looking into those allegations. Mr Green had pornography on his parliamentary computer and claims that he sent an inappropriate or series of inappropriate texts to a female activist, and that is expected to conclude very soon. I bring it up again, of course, because it looked as if the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, was going to make this an excruciating outing for Damien Green.
Before I get on with my questions, Mr Speaker, can I ask the First Secretary a simple point of principle? Is he happy to be held to the same standards in government that he required of others whilst he was in opposition?
Mr Secretary? Yes, I am. I think all ministers should respect and obey the ministerial code, and I absolutely think that that's a very important part of confidence in public life.
Mr Green's trepidation palpable with that answer, but it turns out that Emily Thornberry was just toying with him.
Emily Thornberry.
Mr Speaker, the First Secretary looked rather perturbed at my line of questioning, but he doesn't need to worry. I really am not going there. I merely wondered if he remembered the question he asked at Prime Minister's Questions almost 17 years ago when John Prescott stood in for Tony Blair, and whether he could answer the same question today. So what's the question? The question was this: what percentage of new nurses recruited in the past 12 months are now working full-time?
The nerves simply got the better of Damien Green, and he failed to answer that simple question.
She's like a cat with a mouse.
Very much so. It was a game of political cat and mouse. Tom and Jerry at the dispatch box.
What I'm happy to assure the Right Honourable Lady is that we have more nurses, more midwives, more doctors working working in the health service now. The health service is performing more operations now, certainly than it was 17 years ago. And in particular, in the budget last week, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, was able to announce more than £6 billion extra on health spending, which will make the health service even stronger in the future than it is now.
Emily Thornberry.
I thank him for that response, but since he failed to answer my original question, I'll do it for him. According to the government's latest figures, more than 40% of newly recruited nurses are leaving full-time employment within their first year.
Shut the front door. Seriously?
Yep. That's according to...
Got any good news? I have. Beverly Turner standing in for Sheila Fogarty today. Much as we will miss Sheila, that's the closest thing to good news we've had all day.
Going on to Brexit and the Brexit divorce bill very quickly, because it does deserve mention. It did come up in PMQs. I went through the list of those who
why don't you save it for Beverly? Are you going to be on with Beverly today?
Well,
I've done 3 hours on Brexit. All right, but I've done 3 hours on it, mate.
Very quick. If I could...
All right, then, go on. You can have 17 seconds.
Very quickly, Ken Clarke brought up the question that, of course, around, I think I counted 5 Tory leavers didn't bother to ask.
Would my right honourable friend agree that for decades now, the richer member states in the European Union have made large contributions to the budget of the EU because the macroeconomic benefits of belonging to the large free trade area of the single market make it a bargain to pay that share of the cost? Should we not therefore welcome the rumours we have today in the press of a possible imminent settlement of the method of calculating future contributions, so that it may now enable us to get on with the serious negotiations about how we retain the maximum future access to all those benefits of that free trade?
Damien Green answered by simply saying that he didn't want to speculate on numbers, but that he was looking forward to Britain having a close and special relationship with the European Union going forward. Of course, he is a big Remainer.
Shall we leave with a word via Twitter from Brendan in Surrey?
Go on.
They really are the Morecambe and Wise of talk radio. At Theo Usherwood and at Mr. James O.B. Yes, which makes you Angela Rippon, I think, doesn't it? Beverly Turner is here. I'll be back tomorrow morning from 10. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC.